to go?
Mayor, we are now live.
All right, thank you. Good evening. I hereby call the June 30th, 2020 regular city council meeting for the East Lansing City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Babcock, Councilmember Gregg,
Here.
Councilmember Meadows, Mayor Pro Tem Stevens,
Here.
Mayor Byer.
Here. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. I move approval of the agenda. Could I have a second?
Second.
Any changes on the agenda? I just want to say one thing about the agenda. This is an unusual meeting because it's a lot of discussion, but I do expect us to have a vote during 3.1. So if anybody's listening and wants to stay for, and we may well not, that's what I'm hoping, but even though it says discussion, we may well have a vote there because there is a change in the ordinance that I asked the city attorney to come up with. So we'll be talking about that then. All right, all those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda is approved. The next item is the approval of the minutes from June 23rd, 2020. I move approval of the minutes. Can I have a second?
Second.
Any changes, discussion? All those in favor of approving these minutes, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Hi, sorry.
Opposed?
Lisa doesn't have a link to the meeting. So sorry, I was like texting with her trying to get her on.
Yeah, it's another thing.
That's okay. Nicole, will you send Lisa a new link, please?
Yes, I am currently working on that.
All right.
Awesome.
I assumed you were.
Okay. My full attention is now focused on the meeting.
Okay. Did we just approve those minutes?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay. All right. The next item is communications. All the written communications that council has received have been posted. We had quite a few makeup things to post because they were going to a place that our poster didn't know about. So now I think that's all taken care of. If anybody has anything that they sent to me or anybody that didn't get posted, let me know and I'll get that posted. The next item, 2.2, communications from the audience. The way this works is if you've called in, Ms. Bartel will read your phone number, the last 3 digits of your phone number. If you would like to speak, you can at that time. If you don't want to speak, just say pass. And we ask that you limit your comments to 5 minutes. Ms. Bartel, do we have anybody in the waiting room? Or the
Mayor, the first caller tonight is the phone number ending in 194. You may now address council.
Thank you. I was so proud to buy my first home in East Lansing 5 years ago. My husband and I were excited to start our family here just as my parents and grandparents did. I'm scared. It's truly a terrifying time to live when the mayor so egregiously attacks a decorated officer and wages a war on the finest men and women who pledge to serve and protect our community. When Mayor Byer instigates hatred in a manner that could only parallel that of President Trump. I have some questions that I would like to direct to different members of City Council. To City Council as a whole, have you had any conversations or made any requests or directed Mr. Lahanis to contact the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office regarding the case of Mr. Loggins, regarding charges being dismissed? Mr. Yaden, I would appreciate if you could answer the following questions for me. Did Mr. Lahanis, Mayor Byer, or anyone from her office or City Council contact you to discuss the case involving Mr. Gastito and or request the charges against him to be dismissed? Is there any sort of rule, policy, regulation, or city charter prohibiting the mayor's office or City Council directing you or your assistants to dismiss charges? How long have you worked in the capacity as East Lansing City Attorney, and how many times in your tenure at that position have you been asked directly by either the city manager or City Council to dismiss charges? I believe this question was posed at a previous City Council meeting and you indicated you would look into that, but I do not believe we have heard the number. What criteria does City Council use to direct the City Attorney to dismiss charges? Is it only assault charges, or does City Council elect to request that other felony charges be dismissed against more vicious criminals? How does City Council determine which criminals are the greatest threat to our community? To the Mayor Pro Tem, City Council has the ability to hire and fire all individuals in positions of power and has demonstrated a lack of regard for their own rules and charter. So I'm wondering who oversees City Council? My next questions are for Interim Chief Gonzalez or Captain Connolly, if I may. I was wondering, is there any way to know what you are getting into when you encounter a person? Meaning, do you know if that person has a gun or a weapon, if they're under the influence of drugs or alcohol, if they have the ability to become a violent criminal? Is it often the case that officers are not aware of the race of any given person on a traffic stop or call for service until such time as they're in immediate proximity of that person, especially after daylight hours? Also, the mayor has stated on multiple occasions that she anticipates a reduction to the staff of East Lansing Police Department. Is there currently a surplus of officers? And how would staffing shortages impact the safety of East Lansing residents on a typical day, not considering the influx of students or, for example, an MSU home football game? My final question is for the mayor. Due to your demonstrated inability to follow the rules set forth in the City Council Charter, and as citizens who fear for the safety of our families and the welfare for our future, will you resign as mayor, or do we need to petition to recall you? Will City Council members also resign? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bartel, what's the next number, please?
Thank you, Mayor. The next phone number on the list is phone number ending in 641.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good evening. I am a 70-year resident of East Lansing. I've watched the meetings and the TV interviews, and I'm aghast at what I'm hearing. When a council member is functioning as an elected official of our city, it's not your role to interject your opinion when a case is pending. Choosing to use your position to pontificate your opinions is outside your purview. You're attempting to condemn and convict an officer when you have no position in the judicial forum. It seems clear to me that you're attempting to influence the outcome and choose to ignore the opinions so far rendered by qualified experts in the field. Today, you could make changes, as our governor stated some today. You could make the situation better with steps like maybe a pause on the use of some ordinances, maybe removing some techniques, maybe enrolling yourselves in the Citizens Police Academy, except for Councilperson Meadows, sitting with the police officers, not just the interim chief, to ask what you and they could do differently now. Council members, you've contributed to the problem. You've polarized people in our community and spewed divisive commentary. This behavior is causing a disservice when you attempt to alter the process. It feels like you're joining some other levels of government when officials attempt to influence outside the branch to which they were elected. As a lifelong liberal in East Lansing, I favor changes. But you focused on a person, not a process. Like using your microphone on TV to call accusations, asking if you can review cases before they're sent to the prosecutor. That's a clear breach of your duties and respect for other elected officials who are attempting to perform their jobs. And come on, it was not just a turn signal as you purport it to be. I do want to thank you for hiring Ms. Hardy and the statement issued by the city manager. Those are steps forward. But then I must ask if empathy, respect, and compassion from that statement are for everybody, including our city employees. I compliment what you've done, but you continue to throw stones at a police officer who, to this date, has been cleared of everything. In my capacity as a leader in a public situation, I can tell you my attorney would have cautioned me that comments like some of you are making add up to workplace harassment, slander, workplace intimidation, and more. Calling this officer a liar, Mayor. You've certainly filled the officer's attorney with a full legal pad. You are doing me and our community a disservice when you bias the process. You betray the city by opening us up to lawsuits. Saying you support the police is talk. It's time to walk the walk. Cease the attacks on the officer. Work on the process where you were elected to serve and enhance your understanding of police work today. In addition to demoralizing the police, I wonder how many other departments and employees now feel intimidated. I'm interested in progress toward a better city of East Lansing by working to find what all parties could do. I am a volunteer in a low-income housing unit in East Lansing, and it allowed me to hear a number of very positive remarks about this officer, as I heard in some call-ins last week. I urge you to stop the personal vendettas against this officer, which is unseemly, and I feel legally damaging to him and our city. I wonder if someone from Lansing is afraid to come to East Lansing because of your frequent obscene interpretive descriptions. And by the way, his name is Officer Stevenson when you referred to him, Mayor Bayer, not Andy. Why do you feel it's acceptable to demean another? I would never refer to you by your first name in a public forum. Let's work on the process to improve the environment. And one thing I'm curious, except for Councilperson Meadows, are all of you enrolled in the police academy? I mean,
There are 30 seconds remaining.
Councilman Meadows, you're the titular head of this group. I hope you can step up and give them some of the history of how other mayors have handled very uncomfortable situations. Particularly, I'd love to talk to you about when we were protesting the Vietnam conflict. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bartel, who's our next caller?
Thank you, Mayor. The next caller on the list is phone number ending in 801.
Hello, all. My name is Kristen Villar. I'm a 21-year resident of East Lansing and a 13-year resident of Glencairn. First of all, thanks for appointing Ms. Hardy to her new position as DEI Administrator. She's been a wonderful advocate for our neighborhood, so I applaud that decision. I'm calling in today to comment about the city's response to the COVID pandemic, specifically calling attention to the city's statement of policy on alcoholic beverage licenses for consumption. Wanted to point out that Section 5 does allow for revocation proceedings of liquor licenses for violation of state and local regulations regarding matters of health, as well as for creation of a public nuisance. So some of you know me. Anyone that knows me know that we love East Lansing bars and restaurants and support them as much as possible, as much as we can with two small children anyway. But as we approach the fall, the sharpest tool in your shed might be the ability to threaten the revocation of liquor licenses. While I would never want that to actually happen, the threat of it might be the only and best stick you have. So I encourage you to seek legal advice in this regard. If the city attorney can't recommend it, you might want to consider seeking a second opinion just in case. I understand the city is risk averse with litigation after the past couple years. And are there risks? Yeah, maybe. So I get that the city might be hesitant, but I would take a lawsuit over another COVID explosion. Thank you for your time and thank you for your service.
Thank you. Ms. Bartel, is there another caller?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. There is another caller, phone number ending in 660.
Hey, y'all, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dustin Hunt. I'm an East Lansing resident. In agenda item 3.3, I see the general outline for a city council retreat on diversity and inclusion. And there's mention of anti-racism, anti-bias, diversity, equity, inclusion trainings. And I just wanted to say, I'm a school teacher. I'm white. I have a decade of experience working in several districts and serving majority Black and brown students and families. And in that time, I've participated in racial bias trainings, culturally responsive trainings, and the like. And I'm familiar with the importance of such trainings. And also in my experience, the trainings they're a necessity of compliance for state or district or my personal continued certification in my field. And in that, I've felt a common rub of apathy and cynicism from many white colleagues over the years, which is always disheartening. And of the trainings that I've been a part of, they seem to have done little to alter the dominant culture of the schools and the districts I've worked in. And this isn't to discredit the facilitators and the experts that lead the trainings. I've been to some very powerful trainings. I think part of the struggle is getting white folks to understand their role in dismantling systems that protect and benefit them in order to engage in meaningful racial reconciliation and equity work. And in my experience, in the 4 large districts I've worked in, the dominant school culture in terms of expectations around behavior, language, family structures, time, etc., has always been centered around whiteness. So when the training is over, us white folks are able to hop back into our classrooms or our chambers, our offices, and easily fall back into our comfort zones and choose if we want to do the work and go deeper or choose not to. And so I say all that to ask y'all 2 questions because I'm truly interested in transformative change. And the first, as white folks, what do you hope to get out of the trainings you've outlined? And second, how do you expect to hold yourselves and your white colleagues accountable to stay engaged in the work? Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Stevens.
Thanks for coming in and talking, Dustin. I know that you've talked to council a couple of times regarding this stuff. I do appreciate your comments, and I especially appreciate one of your comments in relation to kind of just hopping back into privilege. I think that's very apt, and I think that, you know, it's a conversation that's not often had. I will say I am not a white individual, but I do have a good amount of privilege, and I can 100% recognize that, and it's privilege in many different ways. The thing that I will say is, you know, I don't believe that I believe that a training is good, and I've been through an anti-racist training before through a previous work. And it was good, but I agree with you. You know, that's a step, right? It's something that you know, it won't create a culture change right there and then. And I think that's why we're you know, adding it as a step of the process. And I'm fully committed to, you know, not just patting ourselves on the back because we did a citywide training. I think we really need to look at bias and policies, procedures, and really how we're approaching issues through a new lens, through an anti-racist lens, rather than just a lens of are we doing this in the right way, but a truly anti-racist lens. So I appreciate the call, and I'm definitely committed to going beyond what that training is and having those tough conversations. So thanks for coming in.
Thank you. Ms. Bartel?
Thank you. It looks like the next caller is joined under a name, Patrick Levine Rose. You may now address council.
I didn't know that I had asked to speak, but I'm grateful for the opportunity. I was going to ask the council if it would take up at the next meeting the question of whether the city has a role to enforce the governor's executive order in regard to the provisions that require the wearing of face coverings in public places. The governor's executive order makes very clear that you cannot make it a crime, but it also does not preempt or in any way limit the local government's authority to enforce the provisions of the executive order. And I think it's clear that it's to be interpreted broadly. That's what it says. And a broad interpretation would be a common sense interpretation, and that would be one that anticipates that it would not require voluntary compliance. And I think currently, in respect to individuals, social grouping, without distancing, without wearing a face covering, clearly in violation of the order, whether it be on the steps of Harper's Bar or in the sidewalk outside of Harper's Bar or in the Kroger's, or the Lowe's or the Home Depot or the post office or the Myers are engaged in what the executive order treats as illegal behavior. And I think the compliance rate with that executive order in the Lansing area has been well documented to be very, very low. The City Pulse article gave a lot of testimony to that. The Facebook page on COVID social distancing has, I counted more than 300 examples of stores that say, our hands are tied, it's not our obligation to enforce it. The county is not forcing businesses to make sure that customers who enter the store have masks. Some stores are, such as Costco locally, but Costco in other parts of the state were and now are not. And none are required to by the order clearly. They're not even required to make their employees wear the masks. They're only required to give them the masks. And then the governor only recently updated that order to require that they wear the masks, but only in specific instances. So the question becomes whether the mandate that people wear the masks and that they do so in public places where failure to do so without social distancing puts other people at extreme risk and danger of public health harm, warrants the city of Lansing, the city of East Lansing, and the county of Ingham adopting some penalty and some enforcement. And my request would be that you study what other cities have done, what other counties have done, look at your civil infraction jurisdiction, and pass an ordinance that gives a very small monetary penalty to people who engage in this public health behavior that's declared illegal and is already illegal in Michigan, not social distancing, not wearing the face covering, where the infraction is complete when they're given a warning and they fail to abide by the warning by curing the public health illegal behavior by distancing or putting on a face covering, they would then be eligible for the small penalty. Now, Columbia, South Carolina on Friday passed an ordinance that I think you should look at closely that puts a $25 fine. Palm Beach County last Thursday imposed $150 or $250 fine for the first offense, $500 for the second. I don't support large fines like that. But the point is that with no penalty, no monetary penalty of any kind, you put the businesses in this community in a box. And you make it impossible for them to conform to the order. If businesses were told that they can tell customers they have to wear a mask or leave the store, and they could deal with any person claiming to have a disability by telling them they'll give them curbside service at no cost. And if the ordinance contemplated that people could sign the back of the form and swear under oath that they fit within a medical exemption.
There are 30 seconds remaining.
I think the city would have no trouble getting the kind of compliance in businesses that we've seen in the District of Columbia, in Boston, in New York. And I would submit to you that dozens of cities and counties are enacting these, and Michigan law expected local governments to do something rather than nothing to enforce this law. I would ask you to do so for the sake of protecting the health of all of us.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. We are talking about that, what we're going to do in item 3.1, if you want to hang out and watch. Councilmember Stevens.
I'll save my comments for the discussion there. I wanted to make note that, yeah, I definitely think other cities and counties have done something like that. And even business communities in certain cities have called for it as a specific tool that they can use. So I do think that's a very apt point. Thank you.
Ms. Bartel.
Thank you, Mayor. That is the end of the caller list for this evening.
All right, next on the agenda, communications from the mayor and council members. Can we start with you, Councilmember Babcock? Are you ready?
I really think most of my thoughts are focused on 3.1, so I'll hold back. I would like to say that Michigan State University has grown more food in a square acre than any other entity. There are a lot of really fantastic achievements at Michigan State University, and I do look forward to the time when we can talk about that instead. the road scholars, so many other things, but I'll hold my thoughts for 3.1. Thank you.
You, Councilmember Gregg.
I don't have any statements outside of our agenda tonight.
Thank you. Councilmember Stevens.
Yeah, I'd just say this isn't, I guess, directly related to one of our agenda items. We've gotten a couple of emails from some folks talking about the university reopening and kind of calls for action for folks to say that we shouldn't have in-person classes at this point. I know the mayor's made some comments as well through public response and through some other means. And I'd just like to echo those statements and kind of put my own into the mix. I don't believe that there's a way that we can open the university in a safe way during this pandemic. I don't. And if proper steps are taken and there's a way that my mind can be changed on that, I haven't seen it yet. But I wanted to be clear on that. I stand with the calls. I really, I don't think we're at a point where we can have those in-person classes. A lot of folks in dorms and closed areas, and I'm just worried. I really, really am. And I know that we're talking about local decisions that we're going to be making and things that we're going to try and do, but I mean, I think that's probably one of the biggest factors. And I mean, we saw, what that spread can be like with groups of people in closed settings, even for, a few days. And so, I think it's becoming on us to really make that our decision and say that it might not be the time. So I know we're going to talk about steps later on, but I wanted to put that out there because it's not necessarily directly related to one of the things.
Thank you. To follow up on that, in my comments, Mr. Stevens, I'm afraid that is out of our hands. So if Michigan State makes this decision, and it sounds like they will, then we have to deal with that. And
Yep.
and I agree with you though. And I think that's what 3.1 is about. And before we get to 3.1, I wanted to say that I was thinking about this today. I was talking to somebody about what Michigan State might do. And they're talking about flyers and marks on the floor and things like that. I said, yeah, that's good. But what are we going to do? How are we going to convince people to do the right thing? And we were going around and around. And then I thought, okay, we're trying to convince 40,000 people to do something they don't want to do. Well,
The mayor cut out there for a second.
She's so impassioned that
This is a pause for dramatic effect.
Yeah,
I think.
and we know how to do that, Mr. Stevens. You and I know how to do that. Jesse
Mayor,
Gregg knows how to do that.
I appreciate you telling me that I know what I'm doing, but you did cut out there for a good minute.
Sorry. So basically, this is an internet, or sorry, this is an organizing campaign.
Yeah.
Trying to convince a bunch of people to do something they don't want to do. So that's how I'm going to look at it when we get to 3.1. I usually have a strong connection. Sorry about that, everybody. All right, the next is city manager's report.
Thank you. Just one item I wanted to mention was that we put out a release. MSU-FCU has put in their planning application with plans for their office building downtown. I wanted to say how much appreciation I have for their confidence in the downtown of East Lansing. Obviously, we've done a lot of great things in the downtown in terms of development over the past, 5 years beyond. And I think that MSU-FCU coming to the downtown will be a great addition to the city. So really look forward to the process of that being reviewed and getting to council, hopefully in the fall, and then hopefully having them move forward. So appreciate their confidence in the city and willing to invest more in terms of resources and hopefully jobs. So that's all. Thank you.
And city attorney's report, Mr. Yaden.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have a report this evening.
Thank you, and thank you for being here. All right, the next we have, because we're going to be talking to you in a second, we're moving on to the business agenda, 3.1. City state of emergency and the local state of emergency. So I guess I asked for this, but what I would like you to do, Mr. Yaden, hang on a second. Let me get this to come up. All right. So our question to you last time was, okay, we know that unlike what Mr. Rose was talking about, we didn't think, and we still don't think, I guess, have a lot of enforcement power if somebody's violating the executive order. What we've asked our officers to do is to write a report and send it to the state prosecutor. And we could talk about that in a minute, but we asked you, what could we do? What could we do about people on sidewalks, and what could we do about people wearing masks, let's say in the downtown? So can you go over what you came up with?
Sure. The state constitution does give us control over our local streets. So I thought if we can take that as a starting point and then provide the mayor with some emergency powers, kind of tie them into the current emergency powers under a local state of emergency that the state allows us to declare, but then branch off and establish a city state of emergency, and then give the mayor some broad emergency powers under that, under a proclamation of a city state of emergency, and then allow the mayor to issue orders and proclamations and rules and regulations regarding what needs to be done to protect the public under a city state of emergency. We could at least have the enforceability or the enforcement power for those orders, because under the draft that I've submitted, I had it a misdemeanor. I did that simply because it is a misdemeanor under state law that can obviously be made a civil infraction if council wants to make that a civil infraction. I was just mimicking state law where it's a misdemeanor offense. I did, the proposed ordinance was modeled after a city of Flint ordinance that has similar provisions. The city of Flint ordinance had some distinguishing characteristics in that it said if the governor takes action, then any local ordinances are no longer effective. I thought that would be inappropriate for this ordinance, understanding what council wants to accomplish with it. It also had some curfew provisions that could be reinserted, but that I didn't put in here because we have some curfew ordinances already. So those were manners in which this distinguishes itself from the Flint ordinance. I also added specifically epidemics and pandemics to the types of emergencies that this could apply to, so that there wouldn't be any question that a pandemic was within the mayor's authority under this ordinance. The provisions are reviewable by council. That's similar to what the state, local state of emergency already allows, that it says the mayor's orders do not stay in effect unless approved by the local governing body. So those provisions are in here. But this also allows the local governing body to modify whatever rules and regulations you put in place, or to in fact rescind them. And then the penalty provision obviously makes it a penalty to violate either the mayor's orders if they're unamended by council, or the council's orders. The 7-day period that they stay in effect unless approved by council was taken out of the current state law. That can be extended. I know that we struggled to get a meeting in within that 7 days when we first declared a local state of emergency. So I don't know that there's anything that requires it to be 7 days. It could probably be more, but I think the concept is because this is a council body that controls rather than a mayor, I think that they wanted to limit it just to the emergency situation and then have council make the ultimate decisions of whether the mayor's actions were appropriate. So that's basically a sum. The any orders have to be published. And then I did make it a specific intent offense where someone has to knowingly violate the order. So it would be a defense that someone didn't know about the order to an actual charge under this. But I think because of the nature of this, that's an important feature, that they actually have knowledge. So that would generally be a situation where they were informed first of the order before any enforcement action was taken.
Thank you. Any questions for the city attorney? Councilmember Gregg and then the mayor pro tem.
So that 7-day, so I do want to just kind of acknowledge the fact that the reason that the mayor is the instigator of this or the implementator of this is really because as a council body, we require that 18-hour notice to meet. And so like, just in interest of having one of us with powers to do this, I mean, just because there's been talk about the fact that we have a so-called weak mayor, that's not you, Ruth, that's just our system. And that really the council members have an almost equal footing with the mayor, but this is just in convenience per se, because having the council meet as a body requires that notice, and emergencies don't come on nicely scheduled meeting nights. But with that in mind, that 7-day period, would we have to wait that full 7 days in order to extend it? Or if we met as a council body, would we be able to amend that before the 7 days elapsed? Obviously this pandemic is going to go on for more than 7 days.
Yes, you could meet within the 7 days, anytime during the 7 days, with 18 hours advance notice as required by the OMA. There are some emergency provisions in the OMA too, but those are very cumbersome to comply with. So it would be my suggestion, between the 18 hours and the 7 days would be the opportunity for council to act on any orders that the mayor imposed.
Councilmember Stevens.
So I have a couple of things that I wanted to bring up, some things that other cities are doing that I want us to kind of consider. So
hang on one second, Councilmember Stevens. So I was confused about this too. I think what this is talking about is it gives us the ability to do these other things. And then once we have this, we can do other things. Is that right, Mr. Yaden?
Yes, this is designed to give you the authority to draft any orders that you deem appropriate to control the public streets and public buildings and conduct therein.
Okay.
Right, so, but go ahead, Aaron, because I think it is a good idea to put some of those things right in.
Yeah.
Section 34C. So go ahead.
And I wanted to bring a couple of these things up just because, I know that we're a lot of the news and social media focus has been around, those lines of folks not wearing masks. And I do 100% agree that is a big issue, but I think that there's some other things that some other cities have been doing too, that I think that we should be, looking into. So, to speak to Patrick Levine Rose's comment earlier, so City of Milwaukee, this is a story from earlier today. More than 100 of their businesses kind of called on the city council and the mayor's office to institute a requirement of wearing masks when out in public. I know that we have a strong recommendation on the front of the state, but it would be elected officials mandating that masks are worn in city public spaces, including stores, theaters, museums, restaurants, bars, public spaces in general. And in fact, that county a while ago required masks at all of their facilities. The reason why they called for this was because, and I think that actually, again, one of that Patrick's comment spoke to what I was going to speak to today is that it gives businesses that ability to say it's a city rule. And making that a civil infraction, whether that's $25 or something minimal along those lines, means that we're not arresting people for it, but that it is indeed something that is against the rules here in East Lansing. I know that there comes into some legal trouble, and I'm probably giving Tom a heart attack when I'm talking about this, because that was even a couple of responses from Milwaukee's folks saying we need to figure out how we can do this legally, but giving that requirement was something that the businesses called for, because they wanted to be able to say, very clearly it's against the city's rules. And I would want to have that discussion as as a, because I mean, we're having the conversation about masks being required everywhere, that's might be a bigger discussion, but if we're in a state of emergency, then, we might want to be able to have that discussion. And, as another note in DC, suspending the use of bar seating, not being able to serve drinks to anyone who is standing, limiting table seating to 6 people or less. And of course, I know many businesses are doing this already, but ensuring that tables and booths are at least 6 feet apart from each other are some of like the steps. And I was doing a good amount of research this weekend on what other cities were doing. And we don't have rules on that at the city level right now. We have guidelines from the state, and we've got, obviously businesses taking a lot of this on themselves to try and enforce what they view as social distancing, but outlining those rules, I think, might be something that we could have in this discussion. So those are just a couple of examples.
Mr. Stevens, when you said masks in public places, do you mean inside or outside?
It was actually the push was for both, but specifically, I would hope for indoor spaces, just as our initial conversation.
So, Mr. Yaden, if we were going to do that, say, would it be a good idea to put that in 34C as one of the including but not limited to?
Well, I think you have to modify it a little bit more than that, because if you read the body of 34C, it talks about your authority to affect areas under city control, such as streets and city buildings. So certainly you could require city buildings and city streets for people to have to wear masks inside city buildings and city streets. But I specifically avoided trying to give you the authority to regulate conduct in businesses, because I think the more authority we give you along those lines, the more the ordinance is subject to challenge down the road, because then you're really stepping onto the shoes of the public health officer and the governor under those circumstances. Whereas I think if we limit it to our control of city streets and city buildings, I think it's more defensible.
So
who are we defending against?
Well, we would defend against anyone who would challenge the ordinance that we have breached their constitutional rights without the authority to do so. Rights to assemble, rights to, First
Those
Amendment
rights.
freedom. Yeah, that pesky Constitution gets in the way of a lot of good laws.
Yeah. Okay. Does that answer your question, Mr. Stevens?
Yeah. So since we have a couple of folks from the RHC, Dewey, I know, Michael Kruger, I know, and some and Linda, I know, from the health department. Maybe I'll ask RHC folks first, if that's okay with you, Mayor, and then I might ask a question of our health officer that's here as well, to see if maybe on the county level we could look into something like that. But for the business folks that are online, I mean, is that having that requirement, does that give you some teeth when you're saying to, patrons, hey, you can't come in without a mask, the guideline versus actual city rule?
Sure, you've unmuted yourself. And then Mr. Bramson.
I would ask the mayor, is this the appropriate time?
Yeah, this would be great.
Okay. So good evening. My name is Tom Bramson, more commonly known as Dewey to y'all. We operate Rick's, The Riv, Beggar's Banquet, Harrison Roadhouse, Roadhouse Pub. I'm joined by Mike Kruger, who is an esteemed member of the DDA and the owner of Crunchies. We've been asked on behalf of the East Lansing Responsible Hospitality Council in reference to the outdoor dining area on Albert Avenue, and Councilmember Stevens, I'll get to your question in a second. We just concluded an emergency meeting of the RHC to garner input on how the social zone has affected our hospitality properties thus far and make any recommendations going forward. By unanimous vote, the RHC recommended the continuation of the outdoor dining area in hopes that the city will partner with us to make this area the best it can be. Some of the comments made during our conversation were that a number of our properties have said that they have seen an uptick in to-go orders. that we would like to see an increase in enforcement from the city regarding who can enter the zone. One idea proposed was giving wristbands at our properties to people that purchase beer, wine, or food from our properties, and that they had to show that wristband for entrance to the dining area. Not allowing drinking games in the social zone, monitoring underage drinking, really essentially abiding by the same rules that we as license holders have to abide by. Also, placing signage like ours around the social zone, encouraging the wearing of masks, hand washing, social distancing, avoiding the area if they're experiencing any COVID-19 symptoms, and sanitation stations. We'd be happy to help in acquiring any of that, as we all have it at our properties. Unfortunately, by a show of hands, none of us were contacted in advance of the opening of the outdoor dining area, and we believe that we could have been a huge asset in helping to devise an appropriate strategy for the success of it. Speaking to what you all are speaking about, in a unanimous vote, the members present also adopted an amendment to our best management practices, mandating that to stay a member in good standing of the RHC, a mask must be worn to enter any of our establishments until the governor executes an executive order placing the state in phase 6 of the pandemic reopening. We would also ask that City Council make a reasonable effort to attend our monthly meetings. It happens on the second Tuesday of each month and lasts about an hour. We recommend that the council members rotate through the meeting schedule so that they all get a better understanding of who we are and what our mission is. This meeting is generally attended by members of the Michigan State University Police Department, East Lansing Police Department, Ingham County Substance Abuse Coalition, Michigan Liquor Control Commission, Michigan Licensed Beverage Association, East Lansing City staff, the MSU Olin Health Center, and others. It is a fantastic opportunity to share our vision and to allow those partners to have input in how we achieve our mission to sell and market alcohol responsibly in the city of East Lansing. I truly appreciate being asked to be a part of the meeting last week with Councilmember Meadows, people from Michigan State University, Mayor Byer, who unfortunately couldn't make it that day, but City Manager Lahanis. It was really, in my opinion, a start to an open conversation about what happens this fall. I've been in this business 34 years. I'm the only person I know that's run bars and restaurants in the city of East Lansing for the last 34 years. I have the unique perspective to be able to talk about what it was like in the 80s, what it was like in the 90s, what it was like in the 2000s and beyond. I would like to be an asset to the city council, and so would the RHC, in helping to figure this out. Y'all have spent a lot of time. I woke up Saturday morning and spent 4.5 hours looking at the city council meeting from last week. And what appears to be true is, in my opinion, there's a lot of time being spent trying to figure out how to reprimand behavior instead of being proactive in trying to figure out how to move it forward in the most positive direction. I've spent the last 34 years every day trying to figure out how to create a safe and healthy environment for my guests and my staff. And so we would like to partner with y'all in trying to figure out how to move that forward. We all have challenges. I said as a board member of the Michigan Restaurant and Lodging Association, helped to create the roadmap for reopening for the state and the industry. And I find that my own city hasn't chosen to involve me or the RHC in any of the decision making. I spoke with the mayor on March 14th. I've spoken to her twice. Councilmember Babcock has reached out to me on a couple of occasions. I had the opportunity to speak with Councilmember Stevens, I believe earlier today or yesterday. It's all blending together. I've known Councilmember Meadows for years through his time in the legislature. I spent an awful lot of time at the state legislature and the national, with the National Association in Washington, D.C. And again, those are no pats on the back, but there's an opportunity to get a unique perspective from all of us that operate restaurants and in the city to try and make it a better place. East Lansing, from a bar perspective, is a much different place than it was 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years ago. And I won't bore you with all the old curmudgeon-y details of why I think that is, between the fighting and the drunkenness and the social media and its effect, and how many fewer kids are coming to downtown at night throughout the city. What I will say is, because of the RHC, when it was brought to existence in 1998, as a result of a tragedy, ironically, at one of our establishments, that we, as well as the chief of police, the mayors since then, the chiefs of police since then, council members since then, have been able to work together towards making sure that the MSU students in particular, as well as the residents of East Lansing, have a safe and healthy environment to come out and eat and maybe imbibe in an alcoholic beverage once in a while. But those are the things we're working on. We're working on how are we going to do, as a result of our meeting the other day. I think Councilmember Meadows said, he's grown up seeing no shoes, no shirt, no service. So as a result of that, we're all adopting no mask, no service, as I said earlier. We're talking about how we're going to do virtual lines. And so we have normally we take June and July off, as it is technically our off season from RHC. We will be convening in 2 weeks. We asked that somebody from council be there, as well as maybe the city manager and the such, to talk about what it looks like in the fall. And we're going to share ideas with regards to virtual lines. We're going to share ideas. As you already said, we have put in place a best management practice to wear masks upon entry. Most of us have, policies in place to encourage social distancing and such. So we're going to continue going down that. What I know is, after 34 years, I've been very accustomed feeling like I know what I'm up against moving forward. And for the first time in a very long time, I have no idea. And so we're all working toward this together. And I appreciate being asked to this. I appreciate being asked to the meeting, and I'll defer to Mr. Kruger for any additional comments during my time. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bramson. And I'm going to personally apologize for not reaching out to the RHC before we opened the downtown. That was just an oversight. And ever since then, you've been invited to everything. So you can expect to continue to be. And second of all, Mr. Lahanis, also, Mr. Bramson, will you did you write what you just read to us? Do you have that written down? Could you send it to me? Because
I read that. I wrote it with Mr. Kruger in about 7 minutes between our last two meetings. So
perfect.
Yeah.
If you wouldn't mind sending that to me, even if you or send it to everybody, just take a picture and send it. And Mr. Lahanis,
as long as I can spell check it first, that's fine.
That's fine. This is we've been talking about how we keep people from just bringing alcohol in and sitting there and drinking it. I think that the wristbands are a great idea. So when we get that, can we look at implementing something that works like that? Thank you. Mr. Kruger.
Yeah, no, I echo everything that Dewey just stated. We're doing our best down here to try to, keep all of our patrons safe. We want nothing more than to make people feel comfortable to come to our establishments. And, I think the RHC today, voting to make that a part of our best management practices is a big step forward. At least, all getting on the same page as far as that goes, because, some of us were doing it, some of us weren't doing it. So, we're on the same page now, and we're going to, enforce that going forward with our membership. And, we're certainly open to the city for any other ideas and any other collaborations that we can have with everybody here to be able to, keep a vibrant downtown going in this weird time that doesn't even really make a whole lot of sense. And I know, there's different orders coming down from the governor here, possibly soon in the next few days, that could change a lot of things, and as Dewey stated, we're sort of, flying by the seat of our pants here. This is all new, but we just want to make sure that we're included in the decision-making process, at least as far as, our opinions go. And, we're always willing to give them. So whatever we can do to help is where we're at.
So just, again, speaking for myself, it's refreshing to hear people who run businesses that have to make money putting health and wellness and safety ahead of that, which I know both of you have been doing. I mean, to the extent of not even opening when it's not safe, Mr. Bramson. So I really appreciate that, and I take you at your word that that's what you want to do, and I'm grateful to have you as resources. Mr. Stevens.
So, and I'd really like to hear, I guess, a little bit more on policies that RHC would maybe like to see that would be supportive of, on the city end to support you in your efforts. The reason why I bring up the Milwaukee call for action specifically was just because it was business generated. It really was some folks that were saying, we feel like we don't have the ability to tell people not to come in without a mask, or we feel like, we're going to get into trouble if we do. We can ask, but if somebody refuses again. So that's kind of why I was asking, and really, and I agree, we do need to be completely collaborative in this, and Dewey and I had a long conversation on that, and Mike and I have been through a good amount of stuff, and I think we know that we need to be collaborative on all of these issues. I think one other thing that we could do, that I hope we could just kind of look at overall, and maybe George could answer this question for me. So practically speaking, a business starts to have an issue within the city, like a bar, and they have a situation where they see a lot of people without masks. They're not able to to control their line. What happens at that point? Who do they call at the city to help out? Because other cities have implemented, basically, in the CDC guidelines, kind of outline having a constant kind of 24/7 contact person at the city. Not necessarily part of like a police department or anything like that, but somebody that they can call to say, these are the issues that we're having, so they can get that information to, say, city manager's office, health officials, other folks. So I guess from a business perspective, what's their point of procedure after they have a situation that they need to contain?
So if that's to me, I would actually wonder what council wants us to do. If you want us to shut the place down, it seems like that would be within the purview of the management at that point. If there's a place that they can't control, or they have concerns about the health and safety, they should probably take the first step, which is to close their establishment at that point until they can get it under control. If it was something where they'd want assistance or resources, contacting us, contacting public health, I think those would both be fine, but I want to know what type of assistance they would want with their own establishment.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm saying is the CDC guidelines kind of outline, and we obviously have our Chief Talaferro as our kind of COVID head response person. I'm not at all talking about volunteering somebody to be on call 24/7, but in situations where, yes, it might be out of control and you might need to shut down a place, but there also might be situations where it doesn't necessarily require a shutdown. They're just looking for guidance on rules, regulations, what they can tell people to do, what they can't tell people to do. And, having a contact person at either the city or the health office that is their business support person, I would say. Is there anything like that? Or I guess I'm just trying to keep an open line of communication between businesses and the city, when, we might have to end up making like split-second decisions, kind of.
So we're certainly open to that. I just have to know what we're looking for specifically, but maybe public health may be the best one to grant advice in that sort of situation. But again, we have to figure out what the business would be looking for in assistance.
Okay.
Also, we have a very educated business community here. I think they understand the executive orders inside and out. So I think that might be more for a broader area where you have a lot of small operations that don't know what's going on. These people know what's going on. My question for you that I think might help with this, Mr. Stevens, is, so you have no shirt, no shoes, no mask, no service. Somebody comes in, okay, whatever, they don't have to have shoes. But anyway, they come in and they take off their mask. What's your strategy?
That's to Mr. Stevens or to Michael?
No, to you, Mr. Bramson, and to Mr. Kruger.
So the executive order, as I understand it, says that you have to, that they would like people to wear a mask as they enter an establishment until they get seated. And then when you seat, obviously you can't eat or drink with a mask on. And then if you get up to use the restroom, they'd like you to have a mask on. What we are, part of the challenge, again, as a business community and as an industry is, speaking frankly, we see videos every day on the national news of people pitching a fit about being asked to wear a mask. Not only the screaming and yelling, but I mean these ice cream stores where people are screaming and yelling at 15, 16, 17-year-old kids because they're being asked to wear a mask, all the way to the shooting at the McDonald's where somebody got shot because they asked somebody to wear a mask. I'm not divesting ourselves of a responsibility or anything else. I'm just saying it's a fine line that as I said, I think to Councilmember Stevens today, I've spent 34 years saying the answer is yes. What's the question? And for the last 3 months, we've had to say no more than ever before. That no, you can't, come in without a mask. No, you can't sit next to your friends because there's 3 of you at the bar right now and somebody sat 6 feet away from you, so you can't join your 3 friends at the bar. It's an industry and a culture change that you would assume an awful lot of people have become very comfortable with, but an awful lot of people haven't. And so the hospitality industry has changed for days, weeks, months, years, who knows? But what we can do, and I think it was a long step with Mike Kruger suggesting it and making the motion today, that if we do it together and we mandate it as a group, that all these kids are going to realize when they start walking down Lexington, Stoddard, Spartan, Park Lake, whatever it is, that they better have a mask in their pocket before they get to downtown, because we're all going to do it together. Because if Rick's and the Rib do it and Joe Schmoes, because I don't want to name anybody, Joe Schmoes decides not to, Joe Schmoes might get really busy, and then they've got the line. In our meeting with Councilmember Meadows and Michigan State University last week, my concern when they kept talking about the lines, and I think one of the doctors may be still on the line, and I said, here's my concern, which is tailgating. What happens if Michigan State goes down to 10,000 people in the stadium and you reduce the stadium by 60, 70, 80%? If you don't restrict tailgating by the same amount, all those people are going to rush to East Lansing. And then we're going to really be in trouble, right? Because we may be able to train the Michigan State students that live within 10, 15 blocks of us how to use certain apps and things like that to get in virtual lines. But all these people that come from Bloomfield and Grand Rapids and Mount Pleasant and Midland and all those places have no idea. So, like I said, there's a lot of moving parts here. And though I understand that the city council would like to make sure that they have the authority to, the carrot and the stick approach, and they'd like to make sure they have the stick. We're trying really hard as an industry, and us as the RHC is re-engaged. Like you said, a lot of us chose not to open when we had the ability to, just because we weren't sure how it was going to let it go. And there's only, as you heard me say carefully in my piece, we can make a mandate for a best management practice, but that only allows for you to sustain as a member in good standing. We have no authority to write a civil infraction, a misdemeanor, or anything else, obviously, nor do we want that. We want to have a group of people that's been together since 1998 that says these are the best management practices. When there's a big basketball game coming up and it's Duke in the Final Four, we're all going to go to plastic glassware so there's not things that could be used as projectiles in the streets later. We're all going to have curfews with regards to our alcohol service. We're all going to have all these things we've been talking about for years, and that's why, if I, knock on wood, we don't have nearly the issues at Bogue and Grand River, I won't use the word, but at Bogue and Grand River that we used to, or at Grand River and Abbott that we used to, or any of those things, because we've got communication and we talk about it. And we all want the best thing, because if I screw up, the guy next door pays for it and vice versa.
Yeah, so.
Hang on a second. Mr. Kruger, did you have so what would you do in your establishment if somebody came in with a mask and then sat down and took it off and then got up without a mask, let's say, just started walking around? Would you just ask them to put one on, or?
Absolutely, yeah. And we've been doing that, yeah.
Great.
No, I asked them to put one on, and they refuse, then we refuse service. I mean, for us, it's pretty simple. It's pretty cut and dry. And we've not had any. We've had a few issues where we've had to ask people to leave, and we've not allowed people in specifically because they refused to wear masks. And we've refused service to a couple of families, which was really sad to see. But, you know, it is what it is. And, you know, if we all can band together and all, you know, be on the same page with everything, then I think that, you know, at least people will understand that if they're coming to East Lansing to hang out and they're coming to East Lansing to, you know, get food and whatnot, then we're all on the same page and they all got to abide by the same rules. I'm not necessarily advocating for, you know, overreaching. Well, I don't know if overreaching is the right word, but, you know, writing tickets and civil infractions and that sort of thing for people who don't wear masks in public. I'm not quite sure the stance on that, but, you know, I feel confident, at least in my personal business, that, you know, that we can take care of our own business and handle things the way that we need to handle them. And, you know, we accept the consequences of that. So.
Thank you. That actually is a good segue into something I want to talk about, but I will go to Councilmember Gregg and Councilmember Stevens.
Just a quick comment. I think absolutely that presenting as united a front as possible is probably our best option for enforcement. I think if we kind of create a culture where masks are so expected that people don't leave home without them, then, you know, gradually as we practice this, it will become easier and easier, and people will not assume that they can be non-compliant because they will know that there's not, you know, that they'll be refused service. So I think absolutely united front, and I appreciate that the RHC has already taken steps to start pulling that together. I think that's great.
Thanks. No, I wanted to echo that statement. You know, I've heard some personal anecdotes as well from some business owners talking about, you know, kind of the steps that they've taken, and Mike and Dewey, I know that difficult decisions to either straight up close the doors and or refuse service from some folks is a very difficult decision, but I think it's something that's for the betterment of everybody. And Dewey, one of the reasons why I just asked the question on requirement of masks is just because what I want to do, especially when we're talking about being a partner, being unified, is give businesses the tools, you know, to make educated decisions on these. So, you know, one of the reasons why I asked for that is because, you know, when I saw how many businesses were calling for it in different cities, I thought, you know, that makes sense, right? And Mike, I credit you for being able to be, you know, very, very stern in your policy, and the RHC itself for creating a best practice policy on that. But, you know, I understand that there are some concerns sometimes when you have to walk up to somebody and say, I'm sorry, you know, you can't come in without a mask. And, you know, in a weird way, making the city the bad guy in that sense and saying, I'm sorry, it's a citywide rule. If you're in an establishment that's available to the public, you have to have a mask, you know, gives you a little extra layer of, you know, let's say accountability on that. So, you know, that's the reason why I asked for it, but really I am looking for a collaborative effort. So if there are things that we can be doing to help, you know, policies that we can be putting in place that will help you, you know, utilize social distancing to the fullest extent, I want to do that, and I want to find a way to do that in the city.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. And this was my segue. So, Mr. Yaden, one of the things that you and I wrote back and forth about was requiring masks inside public buildings, on public sidewalks, on public streets, within, let's say, the downtown area. Is that something we could do without challenge?
Well, it's something that the ordinance as presented would allow you to do. You might want to make one minor modification to 34C4, where it talks about regulate the entry of persons into city buildings and structures, and change that to regulate the entry and conduct of persons in city buildings and structures.
Okay, so hang on one second. So let's get the motion on the floor before we start talking about amendments. So I'm going to say I move that this ordinance, which will be numbered 1488, be declared to be an emergency based upon the recent spike in coronavirus cases here in East Lansing, and move for its adoption. Can I have a second? Seconded by Councilmember Gregg. All right. So the idea here is if we did have a uniform area where everybody was expected to wear a mask outside even, then when they got to a restaurant, they would already have their mask. So if we had signs up that said, you're entering a mask area or whatever, the downtown area, then what do you think about that? What do you think, Councilmember Stevens, Councilmember Babcock, Councilmember Gregg? Jump in.
I don't know. I'm generally in favor of mask wearing. I think we all know that I'm like the head of the mask mafia right now, but making it too broad too quickly, I think we're going to run into enforcement problems. So I just, with the idea that we're trying not to enforce at like too high of a level, and that we're really trying to proactively promote mask wearing as opposed to create a system where we're going to have to be stopping, you know, potentially hundreds of people downtown to get them to wear masks. It might be, I don't know. I'm just a little leery of going that broad that quickly. I think the inside is an absolute no-brainer. I think that anything that we can do to require mask wearing inside, absolutely we should do it as quickly as possible. In terms of policing a whole, or enforcing, I guess, maybe not policing, but a whole district, I don't know, I'm just worried it's too much. But I totally willing to hear discussion on that.
So, Mayor, if you don't mind if I cut in?
Councilmember Stevens.
Thank you very much. Mike, I'll ask you, so just kind of hit the nail on the head here and talk to brass tacks. So are all bars in the downtown part of the RHC and therefore would be part of that rule that you guys put down?
No, they're not, unfortunately.
Yeah. So just as a small point to requiring masks on the inside, again, I 100%, and I want to recognize this as much as I can. The RHC taking this upon themselves and doing this is a wonderful thing. It is a great thing. But you know, we're talking about you know, more members than just the RHC. So I think talking about requiring masks on the inside. Go ahead.
To be clear, well over the majority, there are only a couple of establishments, I believe, in the downtown that are not members, and that's not necessarily of the whole. They were invited to be members, and then once this whole COVID thing hit, it may have been swept under or lost in their email at that point to become a member. So you know, it's hard to say that they wouldn't be members as far as that goes. Though, you know, we are only bars and restaurants. We're not retail. We're not, you know, the other businesses that are downtown as well. So just to be clear.
Yeah. And so I just wanted to make that point because, you know, when we're talking about this, we are talking about, you know, every establishment and, you know, and of course, again, recognizing the fact that the RHC took this step is a beautiful thing, but you know, I want us to make sure we're having some consistency as well. I mean, just talking about the penalty. I mean, I think other cities have done civil infractions at you know, like $25, and I think that that's something that's reasonable. I think that what we're really talking about, and really when we go back and forth between enforcement and behavior, we are having, you know, I want to say two separate conversations, right? What we're really talking about here is creating culture, changing behavior, establishing rules, but you know, and then the other aspect comes in that Tom likes to remind us of and should remind us of, which is the enforceability of things. And, you know, when you're talking about making custodial arrests. And so, you know, I really think that when you're talking about like a $25 civil infraction, you know, you're getting the message across. There's something that you can tangibly do when somebody isn't wearing a mask indoors and they're, you know, but
yeah,
it's
Mr. Stevens, I think we are under the impression, at least from Mr. Yaden, that we cannot require masks indoors. Is that correct, Mr. Yaden?
Yeah, I mean, that's my take on all of the powers that are given to the various jurisdictions in the state. I think that when you brought up Milwaukee as asking the local legislative bodies to take control and issue ordinances. That's because the governor's orders were nullified by the Wisconsin Supreme Court in that state. So the local jurisdictions were the only ones who could step in and exercise those authorities. Here we have the governor with that authority, and we have the county health officer with that authority. So I don't know that we could make it our own ordinance. You might maybe consider a separate ordinance that says it's a $25 civil infraction to violate a public health officer's order or a governor's executive order, and you may be able to get some traction with that. That's one thought anyway, but I just think that we're, currently the executive orders are misdemeanors. Whether we can make those civil infractions is a big step.
So you would say that based on what section 10 or 34C and 1 through 4, even with the change, we would have to have it as a misdemeanor?
No, not at all.
Sorry,
but
you were just talking about the mass in general and the.
I'm talking about the difference
Yeah.
between being in public and in a building, in
Okay.
a private restaurant.
Yeah. So I mean, either way, I think that with or without the in the store, I want to see that down to a civil infraction at 25. I don't think we need to be.
That's a whole other issue, which we'll get to that in a minute, Mr. Stevens. But we have to decide, and I have you, Mr. Bramson, and then Councilmember Gregg. We have to decide if we want to adopt an ordinance, which would not be this ordinance. It'd be a whole separate ordinance that might be on the line of not being something that we might be able to be challenged on. But the one that we have right here is just on public streets. Mr. Bramson, you had your hand up, and then Councilmember Gregg.
Thank you very much. And if I'm not great at procedure with this meeting, so if we're asking, I have a concern with perception with that motion, in that I struggle with the fact that 50-year-old couple comes down to go to Target and they don't have masks and they're walking down the alley and somebody gets a ticket. East Lansing historically has had a perception problem with parking. I'm not here to debate whether parking's an issue or not, but with the tickets and things like that, people, Jesse, I know people come down and they try and go to your store and they walk out and all of a sudden they've got a ticket or any of those things. Just my 2 cents worth, that if the first one's a warning, and if somehow that can be tracked and the second one then becomes a civil infraction or something, we've got an awful lot of people that are going to start coming into this town over the next 5 weeks. I know from our apartment building, we're starting to encourage people whose leases end August 1st and August 15th to move out now if they're not in the city, so that we have more time to sanitize, more time to do the right things to turn over apartments and things. We're going to have a lot of people in from out of town. And historically, in my opinion, that's been a big challenge for our city as people come in for football games. And shame on that, you should look and see what the parking parameters are before, but then they come out and they get a parking ticket and they just rant and rave. Social media is such an influence on all of us, obviously, that there's something there. So again, just I want to make sure that people walk into Threads and people walk into Jesse's store and people walk into Target, Campbell's Smoke Shop and all those things. Yes, RHC has made it a best management practice to wear a mask into their facilities, but to garner the outdoors and Patriarch Park, I know there was some discussion on that last week, and Valley Court and some of those things to discourage people from coming and use those facilities, in my opinion, would be dangerous. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Gregg?
I don't remember what I was going to say.
All right, thank you. So why don't we just deal with what we have now instead of trying to add masks outside? I mean, we can always come back and look at that, but change 1034I penalty. So how would we write that to have a much smaller penalty, Mr. Yaden?
You would change that to be, it shall be a civil infraction punishable by a fine of up to whatever to knowingly violate an order, rule, or regulation. So that's
So-
the change.
So could I propose that amendment? It shall be a civil infraction punishable by a fine of up to $25. I'm going to make that as a motion. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second, any discussion? All in favor of that amendment, please say aye.
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 No, just, so now we have the ordinance, which we've numbered 1488. Is that correct, Mr. Yaden?
That's correct,
Yes.
Mayor.
1488. Any more discussion? Mr. Stevens?
So I have, and I think Councilmember Babcock as well wanted to say something. So I have a kind of a second thought on this. So I also think we should put some kind of requirements on us as the city to post kind of adequate signage on this if this were to come into play in the downtown area. You know, and don't get me wrong, I am expecting that everybody in East Lansing is currently watching our council meeting and reads every press release that comes out of the city. And truly hoping that does happen. But you know, I don't believe that is true. So I want to put a requirement on us that we're putting appropriate signage throughout, even if it costs a little bit throughout the downtown and high traffic areas.
Okay, so do you see 34G?
Yes. So I wanted to, so prominent place in the city's website, press releases. I was honestly thinking more like real actual signs in our downtown, like say on Albert Street.
Right. So I don't think we actually have to put that in the ordinance, Mr. Stevens.
That's okay. We
because-
don't have to put it in the ordinance. I wanted to throw it out there as a thing because I want to make
Great.
sure that.
All right, any other discussions?
Yes.
Yes, Councilmember Babcock, I see you over there.
Thank you. I have huge problems with this proposed ordinance, all of it except the civil infraction over the mask. I think this gives too much power on too short a notice. I think it's overbroad. I think it's underwritten in the sense that, for instance, giving, let's just start from the top. Section 1034B, during times of great public crises, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times for my English professor friends out there. I just don't think this is well written at all. I have misgivings about, in the middle of that paragraph, or those other said officials who are then reasonably available. This is a good draft, but I do not think this is a reasonable piece of law. I think it drops a lot of power with very vague terms, and I cannot support this.
Thank you, Councilmember Babcock. Any more comments? All right, all those in favor of 1488 as amended, please.
I actually did have
Oh,
one
I'm
more-
sorry,
one
Mr.
more
Stevens, I
comment.
didn't see you.
Thank you. So, you know, we are introducing this and talking about this today. We do have a meeting on the 14th. I'm fine to, if we want to have the discussion in the future, I'm fine to do that. I'd also be fine to have that conversation if that means we're including a conversation around having masks required in public, like storefronts. You know, if I understand let's do some action now and have something and we can deal with the situation later on. But if there are big concerns over, you know, the feasibility of this or the broadness of it, you know, I'm fine to have that conversation later on if we include a conversation around requiring of masks in there. I wanted to know other council members' thoughts on that.
So I agree with you, Mr. Stevens. I would ask Mr. Yaden to go back, find some more ways that we can actually impact masks inside is what you're talking about, right, Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, but I was also speaking to Councilmember Babcock. I mean, if other council members feel that this is broad in some sense and gives, I guess, too much authority under the mayor in this, and I mean, it is a fairly significant change to oversight and executive power, then we could have a conversation at our next meeting about it if that's the council's will. So I was really just kind of plugging that question out there to see if other council members felt like that.
Councilmember Gregg.
I do feel like there's a pretty broad level of authority granted with this ordinance, but I also feel like we have been frustrated for the last 3 months by not having that breadth of authority.
Sure.
And I don't know how, I mean, one of the only non-lawyers on council apparently, but I don't know how to write an ordinance that gives us the level of authority that we want to do things like clear the sidewalks, which seems simple in practice, but has not proven legally enforceable thus far, without having something that is pretty broad reaching. So
Sure.
That I get, and I admit that's a problem. Ruth, I like you and I trust you not to abuse your powers, but who knows who will be mayor in the future.
Yeah.
And I don't want power. I want people not to get sick. But we have Linda Vale from the community.
I just wanted to ask one clarifying question with regard to, masks outdoors should only be necessary if there is not 6 foot distance. So are you considering that as you mask outdoors? So
right, we didn't include mask outdoors. We decided not to do that in this ordinance. Yeah.
I will be quiet.
No, thank you for asking. You never have to be quiet. All right, so I think we've had enough discussion. We can just vote one way or the other. So all those in favor of 1488 as amended, we're going to do a roll call vote. I think our clerk is still on. Are you still on?
Yep, I'm still on.
Great.
Councilmember Babcock?
Councilmember Babcock, you are muted. Can you unmute and say that again?
Not muted and no.
Okay,
Councilmember Gregg?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Stevens?
Yes.
Mayor Byer?
Yes. All right, so the next item on the agenda is discussion of the COVID-19 response. And we asked Linda Vale here today, and who else? We have Dr. David Weissmantle, that's right. Elaine Hardy is on. Let's see, Randy, look at all these people jumping on. Randy Telefaro is on. Let's see, is that everybody? Steve Gonzalez is also on. All right. So how did you want to do this, Mr. Lahanis?
This really is a chance for us. I mean, I think we want to all, I've heard from everybody, want to be proactive in thinking about what we can do over the coming 6 weeks as we look towards students returning. So I think between the city, obviously public health, and obviously MSU, to think about what steps we can take that are reasonable in terms of educating people, in terms of being proactive in any rules and regulations, any lobbying we need to do, any steps we need to take to make sure that we can integrate students as safely as possible back into the community. So I think this is kind of the start of the conversation and how we can safely integrate people, our student population, and any steps we can take, RHC as well, collaboratively to work together. If that's a work group that we want to set up, but that's just sort of getting to the solutions. But I think if we want to have a discussion about where we are now, what our current status is, but I think that talking about how we move forward from this point till August when students start coming back, what steps do we need to take and who needs to be at the table?
Okay, thank you. And I was hoping that, oh, sorry, Councilmember Gregg, did you have something?
Just a comment that my personal revelation of the last couple of weeks was that I was looking at this as being a much more short-term thing, while also knowing that it was not, but I was kind of trying to manage to convince myself that we just had to get through the next couple of months. And that is pretty evidently not the case. I think we are looking at many months. I don't want to estimate a number, but I think that those kind of panicked knee-jerk responses that we were dealing with at first, which led to kind of a mishmash of agencies and a lack of communication and a lack of collaboration. I think we've all at this point recognize that that did not result in great achievable solutions. And so I'm really pleased that we're all here today to kind of talk about where our different authorities intersect and how we can kind of collaboratively move forward to achieve the best possible safe solution for our community. So thanks to everyone for coming. I'm happy to see you all here. Wish it was a more fun party.
Councilmember, no parties. Councilmember
No
Babcock.
parties.
Before I say anything, I want to issue a public apology to Ms. Vale. Over the weekend, I repeated and publicly questioned whether she was going to respond to a letter that I was under the impression that the mayor had sent to her. The mayor.
Sorry.
No, I take that seriously, Madam
Well, I
Mayor.
am too.
My
I am
credibility is on
apologizing.
the line because you didn't hit send. And I find that really galling. And I am deeply, deeply sorry to Ms. Vale for having put her in that position. I should not have. I won't do that again. I won't assume that a letter has been actually transmitted. And Ms. Vale, I want to, before I say anything else, apologize to you. If social media has power, I have like 3 followers on social media, but still I did something wrong and I am deeply sorry. So thank you.
First of all, I appreciate that. And I also appreciate being here tonight because I did come here tonight in the spirit of collaboration and problem solving, not, differences and all those sorts of things. We are, of course, deeply concerned about, COVID-19 and what's going on. And just to kind of hash through a few things, right now there are or have been 139 different executive orders related to this. That's very, very difficult to keep up with. I'm looking at executive orders all the time. I do my best. Sometimes I'm right on top of them. Every now and then somebody points out something to me and I'm like, oh. So, our restaurant owners or other businesses that, it's like, oh, I didn't know that was in an order. I can't fault them to a large extent because there have been so many. We license, first of all, my authority is Ingham County across the board. So I don't write orders that apply only to East Lansing or Mason or wherever. I issue orders and do things that are related to this entire county. We license nearly 1,000 food service facilities across this county. So when it comes to enforcement, if you can imagine with 8 staff that do that work, that is a challenging thing to do. We are at a point in time in our world where we are saying that we don't want police doing things that police ought not to be doing. So when it comes to citations and infractions and things like that around mask wearing, I understand it, but at the same time, and I've heard you talk about the cities that have done it, but I am in conversation with health officers in those cities that have done it, and it's challenging. It's challenging to enforce, it's challenging to do, it's challenging to not have, death threats and other things as a result of it. I have had multiple colleagues across this country that have resigned, retired, or been fired due to issuing orders that politicians didn't agree with, or issuing orders that people got so angry about that they received death threats about them. And that is happening. So nonetheless, we take our job seriously and we do things in a methodical, science-based, evidence-based way. So I tend to be on the side of Mr. Branson and Mr. Kruger, where what I think is your best enforcement arm over mask wearing is for businesses to deny entry, as the executive orders have empowered them to do, for people who don't know wear masks. Now, the problem with that, as they have mentioned, is that we need a unified front, because somebody says, well, you're going to make me wear a mask, I'm going to go somewhere else. And so then they have the potential of feeling like they're going to lose business. We are required to wear face coverings in public places. It's already in the executive orders. When you go into a public enclosed place, you can remove that for identification purposes, or to sit at your until you sit at your table to eat or drink. That implicitly says that other than that, you are all ready to wear a mask. Now, I think our bars and restaurants are accustomed to tossing out unruly customers and those sorts of things. But again, we need that unified front. Hawaii, for example, has implemented a $5,000 or 1 year penalty for failure to wear masks. That's pretty excessive. Places where they're smaller, they're having a hard time enforcing them. My colleagues across the country are repeatedly saying that. So our governor has put in an order. It did not include a penalty, which makes it difficult to enforce. The suggestion that we can inquire about masks or document why somebody's wearing masks, that is a HIPAA violation. You cannot do that. If somebody comes to you and says, I have a medical reason not to wear a mask, that is the end of that conversation. There is nothing more they are required to have to tell you other than I have a medical reason not to wear a mask, period. So that's where you are with that. I am currently working with the Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Michigan Liquor and Beverage Association, as well as communication from the Michigan Liquor Commission, Geraldine Lasher, who is their commissioner, who used to work for MDHHS and is a colleague from long ago, who are all standing ready to support us in a, basically, I've been beating the drum all week. Businesses in general have the authority to deny entry right embedded in the executive court order for anybody who refuses to wear a mask. They will not be subject to a claim that they have violated the covenant of quiet enjoyment, to a claim of frustration of purposes, or to similar claims for denying entry to any person who refuses to comply with that. To the extent that we can get businesses to understand that and unite together and say, this is the way we will protect our public. Not only that, but they are our largest army of enforcement. You've got a certain number of officers who can issue the citation. I have a certain number of restaurant inspectors who can respond to complaints. And by the time they get out there, maybe people are now wearing masks. So as soon as we arrive on scene, it's like masks on face, So we have really a giant army of enforcement when it comes to our businesses. If we can help them be united together in order to be able to truly deny entry as is allowed in the executive order. And in fact, that's probably our most effective tool, because they are the eyes and the ears in every single one of their businesses, their inside locations, right, to help us with that. And so to the extent that they do that, not only do they help us with regard to transmission, sicknesses, and the potential to expose people who might be seriously ill and then die, but they also help them their own selves stay open. It is in their hands to deny entry, to require mask wearing, and to allow, and that in turn will allow themselves to stay open. I'll give you a small example. I went to Firekeepers Casino. I guess now the whole public is going to know I went to Firekeepers Casino. Never mind. I don't gamble. I went there with a friend. We ate at the restaurant. So now the public's going to go, Health Officer Linda Vale went to Firekeepers Casino. They've been open since June 1. They temperature screen on the way. They allow hundreds of people in there. They temperature screen on the way in the door. Their staff wear masks. They enforce it. They require the public to wear masks. They enforce it. Their machines are spaced apart. They enforce it. They have tables, card tables for games with people 6 feet apart. They enforce it. Have we heard one issue come out of Firekeepers Casino related to an outbreak of COVID-19 related to that establishment? No, we haven't, because that business has done a phenomenal job of allowing lots of people in there and at the same time enforcing rules that they are empowered to enforce and continuing to be in business. We have other businesses in this community that are doing the same thing. Mr. Kruger, where did he go? Mr. Bramson, I've heard of establishments in Lansing doing the same thing. And I think that is where our largest power is. Our biggest power is working with our business owners to empower them, to educate them, to let them know that this is embedded right in the code. And just like no shirt, no shoes, no service, no mask, no service. So doing a webinar with the Chamber of Commerce, along with the Convention and Visitors Bureau soon to get that across, talking to the Michigan Liquor and Beverage Association tomorrow. And again, a reach out from the Commissioner, Geraldine Lasher of the Michigan Liquor Commission. So I think I saw, yeah, I'll stop now because I see a hand raised.
Sorry, I appreciate it, and I don't want to interrupt. So if I was more just doing that for the mayor's purpose, so I could ask a question at the end. So I don't want to interrupt what you're saying. No.
So obviously Harper's happened, and at the time we were notified of an issue, there were 2 cases. They're on completely separate days. From a public health perspective, that doesn't say close them down. That says, okay, what's going on here? Escalated really, and that was the 18th, escalated really quickly. We had them closed by the 20th. So that did happen, and that did happen rapidly, but it had to be based on the science. I understand the lines outside. I understand the videos of the inside. I did in fact meet with the owners of Harper's and have some very direct words with them. I said to them at the time, I understand that your capacity is 500 and that you're allowing in 225. That is too many people indoors right now to be safe. I also told them you need to enforce mask wearing and you need to break people apart when they stand up from their tables and go here and there or whatever. You have got to do that. Otherwise, we are going to continue this path and either you're going to be closed down or we're going to run into the problem of all bars and restaurants being closed down once again, because we just got put into the highest risk area. And I don't know what the governor's going to do next, but I don't want to have all bars and restaurants closed. You all don't want to have all bars and restaurants closed again. And so really your feet on the ground, your eyes and ears are the very people who are in those establishments every day, and they can help us help them stay open. So we talked to them about mask wearing, we talked to them about distancing, we talked to them about their need to enforce that. And we also have told them they cannot open again until we allow them to open again. They have got to submit a plan, they have to work with us, we have to see exactly what is going on with them before they are allowed again. Executive Order 110 is the one that basically talks about what's open and what's not open right now. Bars and restaurants are open, and so they follow the guidelines of Executive Order 2020-114. Executive Order 110 allows 100 people outside maximum and allows 10 people indoors. So, for example, if you were a conference center and you were going to put a meeting in a room in a conference, then you were restricted to that 10 people indoors. But we went to 50% capacity of bars and restaurants, no matter what the capacity of that bar and restaurant was. So what you saw me do yesterday was to say 50% of capacity or 75 people, whichever is smaller. And that did impact some bars and restaurants. I looked at fire code capacity of your bars and restaurants in East Lansing. I looked at fire code capacity of bars and restaurants in Lansing. There's only so much research I can do before I need to take swift action over what's going on due to a significant escalation in cases. And so if only 100 people can gather safely outside, why would we think that 200 or more can gather safely inside? And so that's where the 75 came from. It was not, as I've been accused of already, a knee-jerk reaction. It was not, basically punishment of everybody for the bad actions of one. It is what we are seeing as a trend across this country, across this community, and across this state. So I don't fault bars and restaurants in terms of that. We knew that was a high risk activity, but we have to empower them to be able to enforce regulations that are already in place and embedded within the executive orders. 6 feet social distancing. They are placing, and they must. You know, it's like we don't have any requirements about that. If you look at Executive Order 2021-14, they do have to place their tables 6 feet apart. Right, Mr. Kruger? Right, Mr. Bramson? It's required, right? So that is already in place. What we have to deal with then is when people get up from those tables, cluster, go to dance floors, do those sorts of things. And how do we then say, now you have to put your mask on? And how do we do that? I mean, a lot of you are accustomed to having unruly customers who you have to kick out of your establishments. And that could happen. But I think to the extent that we have a united front around mask wearing and the enforcement of mask wearing, we have fewer and fewer people that are going to have that reaction. Let's go back to my Firekeepers Casino example. People want to go in there and do what they do. There are many establishments in East Lansing that are people's favorite places to go. There are places in Lansing that are people's favorite places to go, and they want to go there. And if you tell them when they come in that they can't come in without a mask, most likely they're going to. The people that want to go into Firekeepers and gamble are very, very willing, no matter what political spectrum they lie on, to put on a mask because then they get to go in. So that is, I think, our strongest arm of being able to enforce mask wearing and to rely on our business owners, to support our business owners, to help our business owners in terms of empowering them to act on behalf of exactly what's already embedded in the executive orders that we have. So that you know, it's like I've got a team of very few people who can go out and respond to complaints, and trust me, I mean, it's like everything from barbers to tanning salons to restaurants to gyms. I can't tell you the number of complaints and issues that we have to respond to every day. So I can't be at 1,000 different licensed food facilities every day. I have to count on the owners, the managers, what we call the pick, the person in charge, to basically help us, help them stay open. Because that's what we all want, is for them to stay open, but not at the risk of the health of people. And as is proven by places like large establishments that I've already mentioned that let hundreds of people in that have no issues, it can be done. If we enforce these rules, if we enforce social distancing, if we enforce mask wearing, we indeed can have people in our bars and restaurants, and we can stay safe, and we can keep these outbreaks from happening. To the extent that they are unwilling to or don't even know. Honestly, when I talk to the owners of Harper's, they're like, I didn't know we could do that. It's like, you're a business. You can deny, you're a private business. You can deny entry to anyone as long as you're not denying entry based on a protected class at any point in time. That is your right as a private business. As far as I know, Mr. Yaden can correct me if I am incorrect on that. So as long as you're not denying entry based on some sort of protected class, it is your right as a business to deny entry. You can deny that entry before they even come in the door and cause a altercation with you. So that, I think, is our most powerful tool right now in terms of enforcement. Being able to enforce, as you all just passed, those kinds of, it's going to be challenging. I've heard that from all the cities and all the counties that have done it. I know that they've done it, but talk to them about their ability to enforce it and how well that's gone. And what we know is that if we can get, say 70% of people wearing masks, we're going to do pretty well. It's sort of like herd immunity with a vaccine. So when we talk about vaccines, we say that we know that there are children that cannot get vaccines for certain medical reasons. And we know that there are certain people that just refuse to get vaccines for, you know, what I would call, you know, a variety of reasons. But the fact of the matter is that herd immunity for measles, for example, requires that 93% of us be vaccinated. Herd immunity for pertussis is much lower. Herd immunity for different viruses, different things are lower. And so as long as we create a ring around those who are not vaccinated, we are able to protect those who are not vaccinated. Same thing with masks. As long as we create a ring around the non-mask wearers with the sufficient number of mask wearers, then we will accomplish what we need to accomplish. So that's where we need to go, is to get a certain level of compliance with mask wearing and basically move forward with that. And I believe that our businesses are one of our best tools to make that happen.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vale. Mr. Stevens, do you have a question for Ms. Vale before we ask Dr. Weismantel to chime in?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So, Ms. Vale, I really appreciate you being here today. I appreciate you being on the call. I appreciate your expertise. I agree with you that one of our biggest tools is to empower businesses and to get information out to businesses. In fact, one of the reasons why I talked about having a staff point of contact is specifically because, as you mentioned, you only have a few people for enforcement. And I was not aware of the total number of executive orders, but 139. I agree. You can't fault them for not necessarily knowing what's enforceable, what's not. So I would like to see that in the city. And one of the reasons why I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago is that I don't want to be reactionary, right? I don't want to have people, on the council side, on the staff side, emailing you saying, who do we go to? What do we do? I want to have those procedures. Sorry. I want to have those procedures in place, know who the point of contact is. Businesses know this is our resource at the city, and then they'll contact the health department if other steps are necessary, right? Have those in place. One of the things that you mentioned in an email to the city manager was that ways cities can assist with actually encouraging businesses to enforce the requirements. Can you, and George, this might be a question for you as well, can you run me through what that follow-up conversation was like? I mean, what can we do as a city to further push that goal? Obviously working with the RHC and other folks, but Linda and George, what was that conversation like, and how can we implement things on a council level?
Yeah, George can speak as well, but I don't know that we ever got to solution part of that as much as saying that, what can businesses do? What can the city do? I know, for example, the Convention Visitors Bureau has created a safe pledge, business. So to what extent, and we've done this with the Greater Lansing Chamber of Commerce as well with their relaunch, where it's like, can we give businesses kind of like a sticker of approval? It's like, you have, done all of the things that we need you to do, and here is a safe business. So those are some of the kinds of things that you could look at doing. And you have through, Mr. Branson and Mr. Kruger, your RHC, who, perhaps could, lead a charge on things like that. But it really does. I mean, you don't want to leave people like Mr. Branson and Mr. Kruger hanging out there alone, enforcing things that other people aren't enforcing. And then people march down the road and it's like, I'm enforcing it, I'm losing business. And so now it's hard for me to enforce it because I'm going to lose business as a result of it. And I liken it to the clean air law. So when we had the clean air law and the no smoking come across, a lot of businesses said, oh, you can't do this, we're going to lose business. You can't do this, we're going to lose business. Well, as a health officer, when I knew this was happening statewide, I've been a health officer for a long time now. I was like, well, wait a minute, the playing field is level. Every single business is going to be required to do this. So no, you won't lose business because they can't go a block down the street or a mile down the road or across the street or whatever and then be able to smoke. It is the same thing everywhere. And so that united front around businesses, in whatever way you can create a structure, a system, a pledge, a list, whatever. I mean, you've got the opposite list, the Michigan people for, I don't know, Liberty, who basically are creating the naughty list of all of the restaurants that are requiring masks. And I was like, well, just give that list to me and I'll use it for the other purpose. Go to these places. Well, they created a terrible list. It included Sparrow Hospital, McLaren Hospital, and about 2 or 3 or 4 other businesses within, Lansing. It was by no means.
And we don't even have to bill them for that. So that's great. So we don't even have to bill them for building that list for us. So that's
I know. They just need to create a better list.
So but back to my original question, I mean, when we're talking about how we can encourage businesses, I mean, one of the reasons why I brought up Milwaukee, one of the reasons why, I bring up having a staff point of contact is because what I'm really trying to get at is how do we have that uniformity, right? Because I do agree, we do need to have a uniform front, and I applaud the members of the business community that have already taken steps before this, this Harper's incident occurred to encourage social distancing and require masks. But I'm cognizant of the fact that, I want to know how, and I'm looking to you for expertise from you hearing from your other colleagues across the country. I mean, how have cities been able to encourage this without passing? And I know, and I understand that requiring masks in an establishment might be redundant, but the point is that, there's 139 executive orders. People might not know, and saying it's a city requirement. I mean that seriously does make the city a little bit of the bad guy in the situation. So again, that's just an idea, but
yeah, Councilman Stevens, hang on. So we've talked about this a few times now. So we're going to look at that again. We're going to ask Mr. Yaden to go back and take a look. I think that our business people have stepped up and started to solve this problem for us by unifying. They have a unified front, just like Ms. Vale said. That's the way to do it.
No, I agree with 100%. I'm not talking about putting the policy in place. I'm just talking about what does the health officer think that we as a city can be doing to encourage that further? What else can we be doing?
Thank you.
Well, I believe you have relationships with all your businesses. You have, your RHC, you might, I'm not familiar with all of the different organizations and things that your businesses belong to, but those organizations that your businesses belong to are a good first step. We are actually going out very quickly with our entire environmental health staff to visit all of the bars and restaurants in the entire county, prioritizing the kind of the riskier ones first, and going through the executive order saying, these are the things you must do. And then the executive order that says people should wear masks except when they're at their table, which implicitly says they should be wearing a mask if they're not at their table. And you can enforce that, and you can deny entry if they don't. So we're going out because apparently some of them didn't know that. So we're going to make sure that they know that. So that is an ongoing process with us. We are going to incorporate all of the COVID requirements under the executive orders into our restaurant inspections. And so restaurants and bars are quickly going to know that just like anything else that we find them out of compliance with, there's an escalating process of enforcement that will then result in ultimately revoking or suspending a license. Now that doesn't happen immediately. Typically what happens is we go and we respond to a complaint, or we do an investigation, we find things out of compliance. We try to be educational and consultational rather than just heavy-handed enforcement. And so we work with them to find solutions. If we come back and they're out of compliance, eventually what happens is we have repeated inspections that have to happen as a result of compliance, and they have to pay for those. When that doesn't work, we bring them in for what's called an office conference, and they have to pay for that. Usually at that point, it's like, okay, now you're going to have to give us a log every day of hot holding and cold holding is one of the big things. It's like you're going to have to monitor your hot holding and cold holding. You're going to have to send us a log for every day. So we require that. If that doesn't work, we bring them in for an informal hearing, and that gets pretty heavy-handed. I was in one informal hearing when I was the health officer in Kalamazoo, where the managers around the table looked at me as I told them, I said, if you come here again, it's going to be a formal hearing and you're going to lose your license. And they said, if that happens, we won't be here. So their management was like, you better fix this because we're not going down this road with this health department. The next step is a formal hearing, which is a revocation or a suspension of license. And that not only is basically a loss of business, but is another fee on top of that to go through that process. So it's a stepwise enforcement process, and we are incorporating that into our restaurant and bar inspections and basically making it very clear that just like anything else, you know, how you hold your food in terms of temperature, how you label it if you open it and then have to put in the refrigerator, what the gap is between your sink and the drain, and all kinds of things that we do in restaurant inspections and find out of compliance. If we find these out of compliance too, that's going to be a problem. We're going to enforce, we're going to be back, we're going to go down this enforcement road with you until you are in compliance with these things as well. And really the very heavy message is going to be basically the drum I've been beating all week long, which is, again, they can deny entry, they should. If they do, they're keeping their own selves open. And so much encouragement over denying entry without masks.
Can I just jump in for a second?
Mr. Bramson had his hand up.
Thank you. I'll jump around just for a second, but it'll take about 30 seconds. Congratulations to Elaine Hardy. I had the opportunity to sit on the Friends of the East Lansing Community Center with her a long time ago. And so congratulations to her on her appointment. Secondly, thank you, Ms. Vale. Education is key to that whole thing, right? And so much information has been pushed on us as operators over the last 3 months. And every executive order, I'm grateful to have access to the Michigan Restaurant Lodging Association, MLBA, and all those things, and teaming up with the legislature to be able to create some of this stuff. So I'm a little ahead of the game, but you'd be shocked at as much communication as you all have had the last few weeks about this. I get dozens of calls a day. Hey, Dewey, what do we do about this? Hey, Dewey, what's this one? Hey, Dewey, how do we do this? Thirdly, I'm spending most of my day tomorrow with Amy Thomas, going through 8 of my restaurants, sanitarian from the health department, to walk through to help just build that whole program to make sure we can pass it along through the industry. And lastly, or second to last, when we met with Dr. Weismantel last week and other MSU officials, I think there was really a sense of community with us in Michigan State and the city, in that we talked about mask wearing. And I think my comment was that if Michigan State takes the heavy hand on mask wearing, I think from my perspective, that makes my job easier. Yes, we can do it in the 300 employees we have throughout the city, but if that 45,000 kids gets told every day they have to wear a mask to class, they have to wear a mask in the dorms, to the dining halls and all that stuff, that's going to make it easier for the community to enforce some of these rules. And lastly, part of the challenge that we have is if we chase them out of downtown because of some of the heavy-handedness that's been talked about tonight, they're going to go to house parties. Deputy Chief Gonzalez and a lot of police, and I have had this conversation over the years. I have always been an advocate to have people in our restaurants and our bars being monitored for their alcohol consumption and those things. All of our employees are trained. We've talked about our fall training with all of our employees, sexual assault awareness, drug awareness, all those services that we provide. We're still hospitality, and I want to bring people in and I want to get them. I want them to do the right thing. I don't want to see what's happened over the last few weeks continue either with us, Grand Rapids, Detroit, Mount Pleasant, Petoskey, whatever it is. But we have to still encourage people to come to East Lansing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bramson. Mr.
Mayor, can I just jump in?
Mr. Lahanas and Mr. Talafaro, and then I would like to get to Dr. Weismantel, who has been so patient. George.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to jump in before, but my microphone was off, wasn't working. So also on the call with Ms. Vale, we talked about the need to send some information to our lobbyist to try to get some sort of proactive changes from the governor to address some of the problems that we saw, basically considering the dancing, the standing in the large crowds, all those sorts of things. Also sent on to our lobbyist, and hopefully will have some impact sort of at the statewide policy. I also believe that we should continue to work, if it's MSU, Responsible Hospitality, the city, all of us together. Olin Health Center does a lot of communication to students what is the communication and messaging we can do to proactively make sure students understand their obligations? So I think that there is stuff we should continue to meet for the coming weeks to set out the most aggressive communication we can for our students in partnership with our restaurant owners to make sure that the message is all out there, that people understand how to get back safely and how to utilize the restaurant safely. That was all. Thanks.
Yeah, remarkably, at this point in time, almost 30% of our cases are now in the 20 to 29 age group. And that happened over the last 2 weeks as we've gone through this. And to the point of house parties, you know the story about Grosse Pointe and, you know, basically from a bar in East Lansing out to Grosse Pointe. It's like, there's the big party. And we've heard of other parties that basically it's like, you know, so the house parties are definitely, you know, a problem as well. And those are people's private residences where supposedly they're only allowed to have 10 people. Good luck. I mean, it's like, these are the things that we have to try to enforce as health departments. How do I enforce that only 10 people can be in your home? Good luck with that.
Thank you, Ms. Bale.
I will tell you, I have talked to a number of those kids over the last few days, excuse me, and I do believe that I'm hopeful that this has been an incredible eye-opener for kids of that age. Yeah. And their parents, because I've heard from the parents, I've talked to the kids, talked about where they were at. We talked about, I think I told Aaron and Lisa over the last week, I drove through the neighborhoods over the last couple of months and I talked to these pods of kids. And I said, look, when you come out, are you gonna wear masks? Are you gonna socially distance? Are you gonna do that stuff? And they were like, yeah, we'll be fine. We'll do whatever you say. But then it turned out they didn't. And so I am very hopeful just in this 4 or 5 days at the amount of kids that kind of stand up a little taller, because a lot of them can't go home and see their grandparents for 4th of July this weekend. A lot of them are quarantined for 14 days. This got really real for an awful lot of people this week. So.
Thank you. Mr. Talafaro, you keep moving around my screen. And then Mr. Weissman, Dr. Weissmantel.
Good evening. I just really wanted to echo a couple sentiments and then reiterate some things. Our biggest tool, in my view, is also, and I share that with Linda, that our business owners. It's very, very difficult to create rules and regulations that will completely and fully regulate responsible behavior. Even with the most recent rule that was put out by executive order to limit the crowd size to 75 people, for example, it still does not mean that those 75 people won't congregate in a single area or be very close to one another. And those things are going to be, I think the most effective way is to get the business owners that are there that witness that behavior to deny service, because that would be the incentive for people to improve their behavior. There's been a lot, and with Mr. Stevens, we have had ongoing meetings. We met with public health 2 or 3 times a week. We've had meetings that have included a joint information center of public information officers. There have been media blitz to try to, and campaign, communication campaigns to try to address hotspots and problem areas. Those are daily discussions. The executive orders have been a moving target. There have been 139, and I can say that there have been a number of them that have come out on Friday evening at 3 o'clock and take effect on Saturday morning, at which time we've had no opportunity to prepare for, no opportunity to review. So we are often reacting to the executive orders that have come out and put a new demand on, some of which we cannot meet. There have been demands for testing requirements where we don't have agencies that can conduct the test. We don't have insurance companies that are willing to allow the test. There have been so many executive orders, and we are trying to stay on top of them. The Executive Order 115 talked about 250 people congregating outside. And so
we're not in that phase yet.
Okay, so we look at
we're in 110.
So with all the executive orders and all of the things that is coming at us, that information is coming so quickly. It is not coming in ways that are seamless and transitioning from one point to another. Each of them create new conversations, and it's been just a very difficult thing to manage. We are doing our very best. I would say that as part of this conversation, I think to reiterate that each solution creates a new problem. You know, as we talk about now, some of the behaviors in the bars and restaurants, you know, I am certainly, and we have talked about before, and I think Mr. Bramson alluded to the discussions about tailgating. I think we have to consider now we have new high-rise complex that have rooftop decks and decks in the middle of the facilities, and these are private facilities that perhaps we may not have the same capabilities. All of these things are creating real challenges for us, and we're doing our best to be responsible and responsive, but some of it is responsible behavior. Some of it is it's going to really rely on those people that are the owners of the properties to reach out to us. And we will do our best to educate, work with public health at any point if we can help get the message out better. We've been reluctant, and this is one thing about messaging to an emergency. So we have an ongoing weekly meeting with Joint Information Center and the PIO, Public Information Officer, excuse me. And part of that is because you don't want a distinctly different message. You don't want one message in Lansing, one message in East Lansing, one message in Meridian Township. It then creates more confusion. And so a lot of the direction has been pointed to go through Ingham County Public Health to look at their press releases. And we have typically worked with Michael to release Michael Fry to make sure that they are released through our public systems as well, and through our own city systems. But you also want to be careful not to have multiple messages coming out saying slightly different things, because then the problem even becomes worse. So I will pause there, but I appreciate Linda being on. We're in contact constantly this weekend over different issues. And so I assure you that that is happening behind the scenes at all times. There's probably been 5 or 6 meetings a week with different groups. And so it has been a real challenge. And I do want to say, from editorial sake, I think this is, for all of us, this is the challenge with not having national direction. When each state and local group and community is asked to create its own rules and its own devices, it becomes a real problem. It's a very, very big challenge. And I know that Councilman Stevens, you mentioned looking at different cities and communities. We have to also look at, there may be very different state laws in effect in different areas too. And so they may have different types of activities and actions that are possible under their state law that may be very different from Michigan. So I think without national direction, this has been a real challenge for all of us. We're still doing our very best, but I would just ask you to keep in mind that we too are reacting to 139 executive orders and other direction from CDC and other sources.
Thank you, Mr. Talafaro.
I know you want to hear from Dr. Weissmantel, but I just want to follow up one time. I am by degree an infectious diseases person, virology, immunology. I spent 20 years as a researcher doing molecular biology and biochemistry and all kinds of things. I've been a health officer for going on 14 years. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine we could politicize a virus.
It's not a dream, it's a nightmare. Dr. Weissmantel, well, give us the MSU perspective.
Yeah, I'm going to keep my comments very brief and collaborative, and then open for any questions. Just regarding the masking, just in case you all have missed it, Michigan State just recently announced that it's basically a universal masking policy, both indoors and out. And we can discuss the public health policy of that, but that's our policy, indoors and out, with a few stipulations. But the goal would be that we have basically a seamless border between the university and East Lansing for masking, if that's what you would like. we plan on setting the table here with enforcing that to our utmost on campus and encouraging it outside of campus. And one of these steps we're taking here, and we can go at a later date cover a lot of the other things we're doing, is all the students will be signing a health compact, agreeing that they will follow the face coverings, social distancing, and hygiene. And Linda will like to know, and that they agree to follow the directions of the public health authorities if it comes to that. So, and we will be asking the same of our faculty and staff. Regarding the communication, that just started in the last couple of days in earnest to our students on social media. They've already been messaged once about the masking, once about social distancing, and it will become more complex and we'll be asking more of them, but it's starting right now to prepare them for their entry into our environment, because wherever they're coming from, I suspect that the enforcement is not what it's going to be when they get here. This is not going to be the environment that our students experienced last fall. It will be entirely different. And I guess that even my example of that is just the procedures we've gone through as far as rescheduling classes because due to the social distancing. Our spaces that used to hold 400 students perhaps for a lecture now may hold 60. So our largest class sizes may be 70. Our classes that used to hold 30 will now hold small seminars of 6 to 7 students. So almost all of our large lectures will be held online, and then any of the other classes will be socially distanced. And so on this side of Grand River, they will be experiencing quite a bit of that social distancing. When they are in their homes and apartments, they may not, but here there will be enforced social distancing and expectation of the masking. And as much as we can hold them responsible through the student conduct process. So we'll be doing that. And really, we are, as was said, our health promotion people are very experienced in normative behaviors. Usually that takes place over months and years, not over days and weeks. So this is a real challenge for everybody. But we're going to be applying those same principles to make it as normal as possible that you're wearing a mask at all times and that you're keeping that social distance except for those that you are actually rooming with. And that's going to be a demand of our faculty and staff. If all of us didn't believe in it, I don't know if that would matter, because our faculty and staff will be demanding that of us and of our student bodies. So I will stick to those comments regarding the masking, social distancing. I have a list of the other things that we're doing, but that's probably best left for a later date at this point, and open to any questions.
I have a question, Dr. Weissmantel. So 2 questions. One, well, 3 actually. Who do you see doing the enforcing on campus if somebody's just walking down the sidewalk? And then what is the enforcement? You said through the judicial, the process there. And actually those are my 2 big questions right now. How do you see that happening?
Much of that is in the person walking down the sidewalk. We will probably be having students who will be either volunteers or paid positions as student ambassadors regarding social distancing and masking, especially for the indoor areas, but perhaps for the outdoor areas, to encourage and note that and politely invite people back outside if they are unable to do that, or off campus if they're unable to do that. But first offering them the opportunity to change their behaviors, which we would hope that they would do. And in that circumstance, if they refuse to do that, we would take that seriously. And the student judicial process is not immediate. That would take some time, but it would be taken seriously. And the same for the faculty and staff in that way.
Do you feel like you're going to have 100% faculty and staff compliance?
No, I couldn't say that we're going to have 100% anybody.
I'm sorry, but is it a general feeling that staff and faculty are going to comply?
I think it's a general feeling that most faculty and staff, the faculty and staff that are on campus right now are relatively adherent to these policies. And I say relatively adherent because we may have been more clear in what our expectations were right from the start. And as we've been more, our definitions are pretty tight here, that the only time indoors you shouldn't be wearing a mask is if you're in your own private office with the door closed. And so it's taken some time to whittle down to that because it seems, but we're doing that. And, it's for outdoor work and people that, we are right now looking at what our exceptions may be and how we handle those. But we are very committed to the idea of the universal masking policy on campus for faculty, staff, students, and visitors.
So this is one reason I brought up the no masks downtown, or sorry, requiring masks downtown, because I really don't want MSU to do all this work and then have everybody cross the street and take off their mask and start kissing each other. No kissing. So I still want to think about that, maybe to talk about next time.
Sure.
Dr. Weissman, have you thought about trying to get campus leaders like, ASMSU, Council of Grad Students, the athletes to be the spokespeople for this kind of thing?
Yeah, there is a student group that meets regularly with Dr. Maybank and myself and several other leaders and student leaders that are involved in the planning process, and some of that about the messaging from other student leaders and athletes, I would just say underway and being planned.
Great.
So,
Great.
Yeah, all of that is in motion as we speak.
I think that will be one of the most effective things. Like in a fraternity, if you get the president of the fraternity to talk to all the people in the house, that's way better than the mayor or some official talking. Councilmember, go ahead.
Sparty will be on the job with this soon too. Sparty has a mask. So.
Councilmember Gregg.
I feel like this is a vague and open-ended question, but I think that there's sort of the town gown separation of MSU. I feel like students go on campus, they've got their focus, they're there to do their job, they go to class, they come back, especially if they don't live on campus, and it's like, getting off work at the end of the day, they take their shoes off, they let their hair down, they go to the bar. So how, and I don't know how, but I just want to enter it into the conversation. How do we kind of include the East Lansing side of the building, or this, of our divide, in this idea that your behavior should, reflect maturity and responsibility? I don't know how to do that. But, so if, and I totally see your point, Ruth, about, I don't know. I'm still not 100% sure I'm in supportive of masks outside downtown, but if we have kids, literally crossing the street in Grand River and that mask comes off because they feel like they're home and they can, for me, it's taking my bra off, but that's not going to work, right? Because it's kind of reinforce the fact that the East Lansing side is the side that doesn't have enforcement. So I guess that's just got to be part of our discussion, and how, if you had advice, I'd love to hear it. And if anybody else had other advice, I'd love to hear it.
Like Mr. Kruger has some advice.
Awesome.
Oh, I think you're muted.
You might be Bluetoothed or something.
In the meantime, I apologize. My Wi-Fi cut out.
I let him know. Yeah, you're good.
Thanks.
Raise your hand when you work it up. Oh, there you go. I heard you. No.
Oh, that was me. Sorry, Mayor.
Oh.
It's Dewey.
That's okay.
While Michael gets his headphones figured out, I think just one of the things to Councilmember Gregg's position, the university, even according to Dr. Weissmantel, has the ability to reprimand the students when the university, from my experience, when the university stepped in and reprimanded students for being part of a commotion, a gathering where maybe there were couches or something like that, that was the beginning to the end of that event. And so the university has a unique ability to reprimand in a way far greater than, and I'm not advocating for more, but a civil infraction that I think is part of it. So I think if I heard Councilmember Gregg correctly, any sort of education program that either the city, the RHC, the university, the police department, the fire department, Ingham County Substance Abuse, the health department, anybody can, this kind of program that says, wear masks, don't be a jerk, whatever that is, that I think would help us as operators, quite frankly, continue to take the stigma out of wearing a mask. I know that I still wear a mask and that I still get looks in certain places and stuff like that. But anything that we could cooperate in and help with, and things that we could push on media platforms. Between us, we have hundreds of thousands of followers for all of our restaurants downtown. I think anything that promotes the wearing of masks and things like that, we're happy to help educate. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Councilmember Gregg?
I think maybe feeding off of that point, maybe some kind of code of conduct or something that we could kind of collaborate on between MSU that kind of spoke to the fact that the safe behaviors on campus really need to extend into every area of their life, including living situations and house parties and things like that.
So, yeah, thank you, Mr. Kruger, and then Councilmember Stevens.
Yeah, sorry about my audio issues. Guys, hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. No, I just wanted to, it was back to after the doctor was saying that, I just wanted to say, if they do want to cross the street and come to our establishments, if we're all banded together and, requiring masks in the first place, then that's, I think, the best route that we can take. And, I think the businesses, especially the RHC, we're all on board, and hopefully, all the retail places will join with that. And I think that, we can do our best with it. So.
So I've got, Dr. Weissmantel. Who did I?
Yeah, I'll just make a comment. The one good thing about Harper's happening when it did is it happened when we had very few students here. And I think it's a pretty good warning shot, if I can call it that, that I think if that similar event with 50,000 students on campus could look entirely different for both me and Linda and all of us. And so I think we want to keep our messaging very positive, but it's the sort of thing that could make us think about just turning the bus around if it was we had that many more people then going back to residence halls and really living in those environments. We might have a very difficult time testing and tracing our way through that particular situation. So I think it's a good lesson for us, and we've served as a lesson for much of the country. So yay.
Yay.
But for us particular, we know what it looked like, and we know that that's one thing that we don't want to see anything that looks like that again. We know what the danger is there now. So I'll leave it at that for other comments.
Thank you. Mr. Gonzalez, do you have anything that you want to add in terms of the policing, public safety aspect of this?
I think the only thing I could really add is that, from a policing standpoint, I really like the idea that the university is applying with student ambassadors. So I don't know if we do expand, the wearing of masks in our downtown area or any geographic area out in public, maybe there's an opportunity to partner with the university and have those ambassadors in our downtown as well. I don't think personally that it's a good idea to have police officers policing people with masks. I think that is counterproductive with what our overall goal is. So again, if we could partner there or even use ASMSU or some of the student groups to assist us with that, I think that would be a good thing. And we could facilitate that out of our department, of course, but having uniformed police officers at this point policing those issues might be problematic and not productive.
And
Thank you very much. Thank you
well
very much for
aware
that. Sorry, Dr. Weismantel?
Yeah, ASMSU is well aware of that initiative being undertaken through Dr. Maybank's Division of Student Life. So reach out, reach me, we'll get you hooked up.
Can you do that, Mr. Gonzalez? Can you reach out to Dr. Maybanks or Dr. Weismantel and see if we can? We don't actually have wear a mask outside, but to have the ambassadors over in East Lansing anyway, to talk about wearing masks in general, or when they see a group of people together, may be able to approach them and say, hey, you're at risk, that kind of thing.
Yeah, we can do that and at least start the conversation with the university.
Right. And if we ever end up moving toward masks everywhere, then, which I think is where we should be, and I don't know why you all aren't jumping on board. Anyway, then we'll have some work done already. Mr. Kruger, did you have something? Or you just looking ambitious down there?
Yeah, no, just to follow up with the comment about being in the national spotlight right now, I think while I think it was a positive thing that it was during the summer and not, during the school year, when this all kind of occurred, it really has, obviously it's put us in the national spotlight, but I think it's taking a large effect on the businesses right now. I know personally for our business, we've been down quite a bit over the last week since the national attention. I've talked to a number of other businesses that are, obviously noticing a lot less people around as well. I was out at the farmer's market on Sunday and saw, an extremely sparse crowd out there. And, I think that we have the stigma attached to East Lansing right now. Not saying it's not fair to some extent. I'm not saying that there aren't concerns out there. I just want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to make sure that the businesses are being promoted in a positive way and that we are able to, come together and still, bring people downtown one way or another and not stifle, what little progress that we've made. And so I just want to put that out there and say that, obviously the RHC is willing to get on board with whatever we're going to do. My business is willing to get on board with whatever we can do. And I know that everybody else probably is as well. So whatever we can do to maintain some sort of positive discourse in the media and, on social media and, regular media, obviously as well, is something that we need to do.
So I don't know if you caught my very short interview on CNN a couple of days ago. I talked about, and I assumed that RHC would do this. I thought you already had made an agreement to require masks. I didn't quite understand the mechanism, but now I do. So tomorrow I'm on MSNBC and I am going to talk about the county changing the rules, lowering the number to make things safer. I'm going to talk about all the restaurants getting together and agreeing that everybody has to have a mask to enter. And I'm going to talk about MSU going to be doing the heavy lifting of requiring masks inside all the time with very few exceptions, and try to make us look like we had this one issue and we're reacting now, and now we're hopefully we can lead the nation in a better way instead of in the way we are right now. Because let's say we have a huge university open and don't have an outbreak or a terrible outbreak, that would chalk one up for some good communication and good collaboration and make it all work. Councilmember Gregg.
I just wanted to invite Mr. Kruger and Mr. Bramson to collaborate with me. I serve on our DMB, our Downtown Management Board. And I think I like the steps that the RHC has taken. I'd like to extend it to other businesses downtown. I like the idea of coming up with like a safe service pledge that we could circulate, that we could promote through the, maybe the DDA's website or the DMB's page on our city website, or maybe just like smack up on the front page of the city website. But just to kind of, and I think Ms. Vale has sent me the checklist that her inspectors are using. So I was going to start with that and then see if there was a few other things that we could tweak. But I'd like to kind of invite, all of the businesses downtown to present our united front. So if you're interested in collaborating on that, I would love to have your input on it.
And I'm happy to work with you. I could be one of the door knockers. Please sign this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was going to start with the email list because we're distancing, but otherwise, yes, absolutely.
I promise I wear a mask and a shield. Okay, this has been a great conversation and a good start. We're going to do this again. We're going to do it individually in smaller groups, and we'll probably have a big group again. Thank you very much for coming. I know this has been taking a while. Ms. Vale, thanks for coming. Dr. Weissmantel, thanks for coming. Dewey and Mr. Bramson and Mr. Kruger, thank you for coming. And Mr. Talafaro, Elaine, Ms. Hardy, we haven't heard from you. Would you like to add anything?
I actually am here to talk to you about your retreat. So no.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. I asked you to turn on too early. I'm sorry. And also Mr. Gonzalez, thank you very much for all of your input. You do not have to stick around for the rest of the meeting, but you can if you want. The next item we're going to talk about is a staff retreat on training and diversity and inclusion. So you can stay if you'd like to. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate your time.
Yep. Thank you. Rather than take a break, I'm going to let everybody be adults and leave if they need to, which I do for 5 minutes. Mr. Stevens, would you mind starting this part? I mean, 2 minutes. I'll be right back. But do you mind starting?
Sure.
All right, thanks.
No problem. Well, by starting, I will hand it over to Elaine Hardy, who is our
good
staff
start.
contact for this item. So go ahead, Elaine.
Thank you. George, before I get started, did you have any comments that you wanted to make? Or?
Yeah, I can just start off and say, obviously, we listened to council with your desire to have a retreat. I went back after hearing from council and talked to Elaine directly. We had a good conversation. Elaine went back and talked to, there's a committee of employees, so it's not just Elaine. She's sort of leading a committee that's working on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they have done some work to come up with some different sort of thoughts and proposals. They're not a one-shot deal and we're done. These are going to be more intensive in terms of looking at a cultural change to what was mentioned earlier. I think it was a good point that the gentleman mentioned earlier, but we are not proposing a one-shot deal and we're done with training at this point. This is going to be a longer-term engagement, and really we'll want to see what council thinks about this proposal, and if you want to give us more direction and go back and do a little bit more work on it, and how you want to move forward. So with that, Elaine, if you want to talk a little bit about the ideas.
I will definitely do that. George alluded to and talked about the desire for us to not check a box, right, and do the diversity training and do the anti-bias training and then go back to business as usual. His statement talked about us doing a cultural realignment, and which is really the reason why I signed on, because I feel like the city of East Lansing is in a unique position, probably more unique than any other city, to lead our region in a real cultural shift that starts with our leadership and permeates out into our community, that provides an opportunity for us to really rebuild East Lansing or reimagine East Lansing, so that on the other side of this, that we go beyond diversity and inclusion and are really that anti-racist society that we all believe that we can be. So this is a very skeletal outline of training that we are looking at doing for the next 6 months. George talked about the training being intensive, and it is designed where we begin where we are, but with the leadership. And so this anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion training outline begins with this month, us looking at and researching the methodology and best practices that we've seen municipalities and organizations do across the country. We're going to develop and publish an RFP so that we can get the best minds together to collaborate with us and to facilitate our trainings. And then we're going to select a facilitator. If you do the next slide, Nicole. This is going to begin with your council retreat. Our vision is that we are going to kind of tackle our process in 3 phases. So we're at the first 6 months, we're going to be acquiring knowledge. The second phase of this is we're going to be applying that knowledge. So we'll go to the application phase, and then we'll go to the adaptation phase of this. And so those are 2 phases out. This begins with us at the beginning of us getting a shared language and understanding what anti-racism, what diversity, what bias is, and agreeing as an organization what that means. So as we talk to each other and look at ways in which we're going to change our lens to look at it from an equity perspective, that we're all using the same language, that we're all talking about the same thing in the same way. So the first thing first is to set up an opportunity for council, our city manager, and directors to spend some time doing an initial race equity training retreat for a full day. Now, I'm offering options because optimally, researchers and people, professionals in the field, believe that this introductory portion should be done in an 8-hour day. We can split it up over the course of 2 days if that's the council's pleasure. But from what I'm hearing from experts, that this is critical to getting the group to bond together and spend that time in the initial phases learning. So there are 2 options laid out here that we would do 1 full day or 2 half-day retreats based on what the council's pleasure is. You want to do the next slide, Nicole? The second thing that we would do in August would be to take a trip to the Jim Crow Museum. And this is a guided tour of the Jim Crow Museum. Oftentimes having an opportunity to go to a place and do some experiential learning as a group bonds you in a different way. Now, right now, due to COVID, the Jim Crow Museum is closed. Now, there's some talk about them reopening in August, and I'm in contact with them. So if we can schedule this in August, we will. If we have to move it back to September or whenever we get past the point where we can take this trip as a group, then we'll do that. But we're going to keep this on our calendar as a planning point pending the reopening of the Jim Crow Museum. And this next slide. So how this training, if you are following me, how it's tracking is that we're going to do the leadership first. So it'll be Council George and his director staff. And then we'll go into the supervisory level, offering them the same opportunity to participate in a full day 8-hour training. These trainings will be in person and in small groups. So we've got a city workforce, I think including the courts, George, am I right, about 528 individuals? And so we're looking at, doing small groups of cohorts as we present this training to the leading managers and then to the rest of the city staff. So it'll go from George and council and directors to leading managers. Then the next slide, Nicole. Followed by then staff for the training, the introductory training for the full staff. This is all of the other staff in the city. We are still recommending that this group does a full day, 8 hours. It's in person and it's in small groups again. This is helping us to develop what I talked about, that shared language, that shared common understanding about anti-racism, anti-bias, so that we all are tracking with the same information. The reason why we do the leadership first is when this group has questions or pushback, we can answer them. We'll know how to be able to talk to our staff and to our employees about the questions that they may have. So as we continue through this process, you'll notice that we'll start in September with one introductory session, but then we'll go monthly, every month, for these in-person 8-hour sessions. And again, we can do them half days, but it'll push our phase 2 of implementation of our plan into July of 2021. So we will do the same kind of method with the in-person trainings that we did with the introductory. With this continuation of our learning, is that it'll be in the same cohort that you were in. So it'll be the council with city manager, then the leading managers, then the staff. And we'll go through this process until we have completed the first phase of our learning. If you want to go to the next slide, Nicole. In September, we'll also have the opportunity, because I've heard from council that you want to hear the community. You want to know what the community is thinking about. And so we're going to provide an opportunity based on this conversation today in September, so that council can hear from the community. And we can set that up as a town hall, whether we do it virtually or in person, depending on where we are in our fight in the pandemic. But this will be an opportunity for council to hear from the community as well. And we can go to the next slide. Uh-oh, is that back? Can I go back one? Great. So this is what I talked about with the city staff. It's the same process that we'll use with council, is that the city staff will do the same processes. They will monthly have an opportunity to meet in their small cohorts and continue their training for the next 6 months. And then the last thing that we'll do, I think this is the last slide, if you want to go to the next slide, is that then we'll do our knowledge application, and that will lead us into our phase 2. So we'll begin to apply that knowledge. We will be able to know when we're ready for phase 2, when we can look at ourselves individually and know that we're ready to apply everything that we have learned, all the work that we've done, to start talking about a cultural transformation. And then that's when we'll introduce the phase 2 of it. And really, that's kind of the plan for the training in a nutshell.
Thank you, Elaine. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so really it's to hear from council. This is an intensive schedule that we've laid out. So we wanted to sort of give you the option to hear what the full, if we could think of the ideal training where time and money were not going to be an issue, and we could say this is going to be the best solution we could come up with, this would be it. Now, all of that comes into the realities of our ability to do the work that the council needs to do, your all day jobs, the city's work. So if there's some amount that has to be considered with your schedules and we have to do something less, take longer to do it, those are certainly considerations that we want to hear. And then we can go back and do some tweaks to it. Perhaps it's leadership at this level. And then for all staff, it's something of a pared back, because we have so many staff that would need to be trained. Perhaps there's some paring back that we could do. But that's sort of what we're looking for now, is to hear, and we do know that this is a robust solution. So it's not with a, lightheartedly we're saying we're going to take a day a month. We understand that. Also to say, what do we think the commitment could be from the organization moving forward?
Mayor, you're muted.
Mayor Pro Tem Stevens.
Thank you. So one, I'd just like to really compliment Elaine for putting this together, city manager as well. I think that making a real commitment on this, means going the full 9. And I think this is done. And I also just want to make a statement in general. I do love the fact that we have a diversity and equity position within the city now. I think that was a great decision. Elaine, I think you are definitely the right person for that job. And I think that we're going to have a lot of conversations in the next few months, years, where we come to a halt with where our bias comes in and what we can be doing as a city to be better. And I want to let you know, and I want to let staff know that that at least myself as a member of council, you have my back. I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to make the change. And I'm willing to create an environment in which we can really have effective change. And if that environment isn't there, then we need changes to be made. So I like this. Again, to a previous caller's statement, this isn't it. Training is good, and I mean, we have seen statistics on areas where training has worked, and it's hard to quantify a culture change, of course, and we've also seen situations where, of course, it hasn't. To do this type of training, you really have to do it with an open mind and with the attitude that I have something to learn from this. And that's how I'm going to be approaching it. And I hope that's how other folks approach it. But I do want to just mention that, throughout your work, Elaine, in the next several years in this position, it's not just going to be trainings. So I think that you have support for that. So thank you for doing this.
Anybody else? So Mr. Ohanis is looking at asking us if we want to do the intensive training. So my question is, or if we want to split it up, can we do this on the weekend days or not, Mr. Ohanis?
Yeah, that would be part of the option would be for a Saturday. It would be up to council to determine what would work for you, because obviously we'd want to do a time when it could get all of you hopefully to come. So that would be a question for council in terms of what commitment you'd be able to make.
So I agree that the 8-hour training, the bonding that happens after about 2 or 3 hours is quite amazing. And I think it's part of the process. So I like the 8-hour training idea, and I'd be willing to do that on a weekend, but I know some council members might not be able to do that.
I'd be able to do that, and I'd be willing to do that.
Councilmember.
I have to hire somebody to watch the store, but that's fine.
Able and willing. Able and willing. Thank you.
Well, there we go. We can commit Mark.
That sounds like a commitment.
Yes. Okay. Show up to the meeting, you get volunteered.
Right. That's right. So I think that
so
is a good
Go
ahead.
Yep, we can
George.
move forward and move forward and begin the scheduling process.
Right.
And look toward, we can engage this firm potentially beginning as soon as August. And we'll have to get calendars out to you guys to look for a Saturday to start. And we can do that as soon as possible.
Okay, great. Thanks for working on this. Elaine, welcome. How'd you like your first
Thank
council?
you.
Well, you've been to many council meetings.
I have. Yes. Council meetings are always riveting and exciting.
I can see. Nicely said. Nicely said. All right. Thank you.
I do just want to, as a point of clarification, so we are okay with moving forward with the initial 8-hour and then the 8-hour a month commitment for the next 6 months, just so that I'm clear?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. That's gonna be awesome.
All right. Thanks, Elaine.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So the last item on the agenda is Stonewall. Councilmember Greg.
Oh yeah, I kind of forgot this is on the agenda. Well, so we're out of June, so we kind of missed our opportunity to represent or recognize Pride Month in June. But I just wanted to kind of include this in our yearly calendar going forward. This year is the 50th anniversary of the first Pride March, which was in itself an anniversary of the Stonewall riots in Greenwich Village. So I think not quite within my lifetime, as it's frequently pointed out to me, I'm on the young side of this council, but in 1969, it was illegal to do anything in public that might identify you as a homosexual, and also things now that we've represented or that we've recognized as transgender. So we have experienced a significant cultural shift in gay rights and gay identity, LGBT identities. By no means perfect. Obviously, this is still something that culturally we need to work on, but I think that East Lansing, as one of the first communities that had an equity clause in our ordinances, I think we should be recognizing Pride Month. So I would love to see the Pride flag and the transgender flag as well flown, at least during the Pride week, which is the week of June 28th, going forward. So if we could just kind of plan that for the future, that would make me happy.
Second.
No, If nobody objects to that, George, will you put that on the flag calendar?
Yeah, the Stonewall riot commemoration goes up until July 3rd. So if we can get a flag, would you like us to try to put the flag up for the next 2 days?
Yeah, I'd love that.
I
That'd be
think that
great.
Ms. Hardy said she could try to secure us a flag. We did look for the flag that the mayor mentioned. We couldn't find it, but we think we can secure a flag. So if with that council's direction, I can try to raise the flag for the next 2 days. And then we'll certainly put it on for next year as well.
Very much in favor.
Yep.
I
Awesome.
have it on good.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Babcock.
I have it on good authority that someone in this group, if not all of us, can get our hands on a pride flag pretty quickly. So we got you covered there, City Manager.
Give it to George.
We'll be covered. Excellent.
All right. Council, Elaine.
Well, just, I was just going to mention that it's still not even too late, to George's point with regard to the commemoration of the stone, that we may be able to still yet make some public statement. I know that we did put something out on the anniversary of the 5th anniversary of the Marriage Equality Act. So there shouldn't be any reason why we couldn't get something out that a statement from council that commemorates Stonewall.
Yeah, I think we could have that on our next agenda, Mayor.
Sure. George, can you work on that resolution?
Yep, we certainly can have a resolution for the 14th.
All right,
I can
perfect.
collaborate with you on that, George, if you want my help.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool.
So our next meeting is the 14th then?
Yes, July 14th, right?
Okay. Yep. Councilmember Stevens.
So this is off topic, but I just wanted to mention at the end, I think that our conversations today were very productive. I think that having members of the RHC here were very productive, members of MSU to answer questions, and from our health department. I'd like to see another meeting like this before the end of the summer, before students come back, to kind of give some updates on policy changes after executive orders might be passed, after procedures might be altered. And I'd just like to see that happen if the rest of council is on board with that.
Yep. Jesse? Okay, you're disagreeing. Or
No, all good. Yeah, no, I actually I find joint meetings of the council and different committees to be very productive. I thought our joint meeting with the DDA, back in the second council meeting of my term was very productive. I'd like to kind of, as things come up to intersect with the different groups that we've empowered throughout the city, I'd like to have more joint meetings, or at least inviting commissions to talk to us about what they're working on. Obviously, COVID is the most important thing that's happening right now. So anything that intersects with that would be top priority, but I really like to hear what everybody's working on. We've got some really talented volunteers working on our behalf. So
the problem I felt with tonight is that those people have worked all day long, and they were part of an agenda. I wish, and that was partly our fault because we added a bunch of things, but I think if we do this again, maybe it could be like even maybe on a different night or something, so that it could just be us, RHC, MSU, just the COVID, how are we dealing with this, and not have anything else on the agenda. And that was my fault. I should have said no instead of yes. Right.
You know what else we could potentially do is maybe have public comments at the end. Sometimes I know it's not good but that's another thought, because we can't control that. Right. And then the guests would wait, but we could think about that as well.
Yeah, that's the only thing that I didn't like about it, because I felt like I had to hurry people, because I could see Dr. Weisfeld just wilting. He's so tired. Yeah. Okay, but it was a great meeting. I agree. Okay, if there's nothing else for the good of the order, I will end the order. Good job tonight, guys.
Okay.
We
Good
are
night.
adjourned.
Thank you.